Okay, so I think it's 7:03.
Mhm.
I'm just going to talk because I think I had emailed Paul and Leah that I'm happy to take minutes again for tonight. So I was just going to talk so that way I can make sure these are getting captured. So 7:03, we're going to call to order the election committee meeting. And I think our first order is, chair election, and then we can, give Andrew a couple of minutes to talk really quick, if that works for everybody.
Were we having nominations? No.
I think it's the three of us. I think we can handle nominations.
I'd like to nominate Andrew Collars as chairman of the elections committee.
I don't know if it's possible, and I'd rather not. Niles, I don't know if that's even possible.
Right.
But.
So under the code, you can't have a council member be a member of the election committee. So that is in the code. So I would say in that capacity, the council chair cannot be chair of the committee. Even in a sort of ex officio kind of way. You couldn't vote anyways. So I would. That's based on my reading of the code. I could ask Ron, but based on my reading of the code, even being chair in a non-voting matter would violate the spirit, if not the letter, of that. So,
Well, thank you, Paul, and I dodged the bullet. Thank
you. You would do a great job. You really would.
I don't know about that.
Anyhow.
So.
Sorry, I'm gonna really quick jump in. If it looks like I'm looking off screen and not ignoring you, that's the second screen where I have the minutes up. It is not me not paying attention. It's just me trying to make sure I'm capturing what's going on.
So, just to sort of keep this along, if George or Leah, do either of you want to nominate either yourselves or one of your others to be the chair?
I'll nominate George. Lucky George.
Hey, I hope you're feeling better. I'm happy to do it if that's what the other committee members want, but
that's fine. I'll second it then.
All right. Then I guess formally, we have three members, first and second. It does constitute a majority, but if you just want to all indicate,
do we want to vote?
Yes, I'd say still vote,
Okay.
just to make it official. So
Okay.
all in. So if you want to call
favor?
it, okay.
Aye.
Okay. So that is done. Sorry, I'm just typing. Getting caught up. Okay. First thing I'll do is I'll recognize Andrew for a couple of minutes to kind of speak, as he had asked for the opportunity to address the meeting.
Thanks, George. So I've had many conversations since our last council meeting, and I just want to first of all recognize Peter and Natalie and the others, the other committee members, Paul, George, and Leah, for all the hours and hours and hours you put in during these meetings, and Peter separately outside of the meetings. And I was very saddened by the outcome of the last council meeting and the resignations. And as those that resigned know, I, in one instance, appeared before the door, knocked on the door of the committee member that resigned, and asked that committee member to reconsider. Did the same over a phone call with the other committee member, and so I was very disappointed, and hope that I didn't, or the council didn't, play a role just by asking questions that led to those resignations. What I want to say is that there's too much finger pointing, too many knee-jerk reactions, too many guilt by association attacks that occur in this village during these meetings, and I think we should just move forward and just hope for and expect that the intentions of every volunteer in this village and every resident in this village is pure and honest, and that there's no malign intent. in what we do here. And I think that holds true. And I'm just saddened that there are factions that point fingers at each other. Having said all that, I would ask that tonight's meeting is about rectifying the few items that we raised during the council meeting that either were not reflected in exact wording or were added after the last committee meeting, and those items by mistake or lack of time were not inserted. Whatever it is, too much time has been put into that previous effort for us to start from scratch, and I don't think that's the intent of this committee. I think there are a few items, we check the box, look at it, review it, vote on it, and move on. I think that would be the intent of this existing committee and the committee as it existed before the two resignations. And that's all I'm asking for. I'm asking for the residents to not attack each other and just to speak in a civil tone, because we are all in it together and we're all trying to do the best, what is in the best interest of this village. And that's all it is. And no one is trying to undermine anyone here. Let's just do what's right, and let's get it done. And so I thank you again for all the hours you've put in. Peter, I see you. I don't see Natalie on this call, but I thank her as well. And I thank Paul, Leah, and George for hanging in there as well. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Andrew, well said. But I have a stupid question probably at the beginning here real quick. I have two drafts of two different plans, and they're different. And one is the 16th of December, and one is the 29th of December. What are we speaking on tonight? What are we working on tonight? And is Peter on? Maybe Peter could address that, because he has sent a note around to all of us tonight. Leah, did you get a copy of Peter's note? She might be muted. He's saying that there's two different drafts here.
Am I being asked to speak? I'm sorry.
Yes.
So, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Well, I want to say two things about this meeting. And basically, I object to what's going on here on two grounds. First, we're being asked to vote on several things that have already been decided by the committee. And there is simply no need to vote on them. They've already been approved and are therefore part of the committee-approved election plan. The only apparent purpose to be served by voting on them again, it seems to me, is to create an opportunity for the committee to reject what it's already approved. And, so on that ground, I object. If this is in the nature of a setup, and I don't say that as an accusation, it's just the way I perceive it, that, we are being presented with an opportunity to reject the plan that has already been fully approved. I think if you go back to the various draft minutes that have been presented, it's absolutely unambiguous that numerous parts of this plan have already been accepted, been voted on by the committee by strong votes, votes of 5-0, 4-1. There's no doubt about that. And so that applies to the plan as a whole. It applies to the ballot curing issue. And, the idea of proceeding with this and having additional votes to verify or perhaps reject what has already been accepted, to allow the new 3-person committee to reject what the 5-person committee had accepted, that seems illegitimate to me. Second thing I want to say is that the plan that we are being presented with, which I think is what Paul is referring to, the plan that we're being presented with is not the plan that the committee has approved. It's different in some very, very substantial different dimensions. First, it rejects the responsibility of the committee that the previous plan had acknowledged with respect to the voter roll. It the ballot curing material that had been in the previous plan, that had been accepted by Arthur Alexander and then voted on by the committee. That language has now been entirely removed. A sentence from the December 16 draft about conflicts of interest forms has been removed, so that there's no time if a candidate submits a conflict of interest form that's incomplete. Now there's no time, so I'm not sure what happens at that point. No time to tell him, hey, you didn't do this right. You can either sign it or withdraw, or complete it properly and withdraw, or withdraw. Excuse me. And so it's not clear, if that person will be accepted without a conflict of interest form, or if he'll be rejected without being given an opportunity to solve that problem. In which case, there are fewer candidates, and of course that works to the benefit of incumbents. There are numerous such problems. This plan that we are apparently discussing tonight is not a plan that has been approved by the committee. It's radically different than what was approved by the committee. Most of those differences were not annotated, were not called it, no attention was called to them. We were left to find them for ourselves, which I did my best to do. And as a result, I think that we're being given a plan to vote on that, not myself, but the others are being given a plan to vote on that is in a way deceptive. And, we have been led to believe that this was going to be a vote on the December 16 plan, or the plan that the committee had adopted. And it is not that plan. It is radically different in fundamental respects. And for that reason, I object to the entire meeting, and I suggest that we either go back and get, that we address the problems that I've raised with respect to what we've already voted on, and with respect to which draft exactly are we being asked to approve. And I'm just very disappointed that this effort has resulted in such a inadequate response by the committee and frankly by the council. So that's my perspective.
Peter, I don't see how we can have a meeting tonight until this is worked out.
I agree with that.
So, Paul, can I jump in right here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the draft under consideration is the one that, at least my understanding, is the version that I sent to you and Leah and Andrew and everyone on the 29th, and then there was a version that was shared again on the 4th that is the same language. It just has some of the comments that I put in the margins pulled out. The process of how the draft for I think it was called like the December 29 draft, that was taking, and this is how I built that out. I took the draft version that we had voted on and approved at our November 15th meeting. And that was the baseline for everything. I took the draft version that was shared to the council on the 16th and went line by line through that to try and import the changes between the 16th and the November 15th draft into that draft from the 15th, because I used the 15th because that's the one we voted on, and that was the one that I had the file for. So I incorporated the changes that had been made into the 16th one, and then, as you saw in the draft for the 29th, there's a clean version and the track changes. The track changes showed everywhere where I went through and updated the changes that were the things we had voted on at the 3 meetings in November and the December meeting. So that's what that 29th version is, the previous version just with the changes incorporated. And so that's where those edits, or that's where those differences had come from. And it was the other thing, and so once I had that baseline of the updated version, then I went through and tried to tag, these are the outstanding issues that are on the agenda stuff tonight, like the timeline cleanup, grace period, things like that. And then the other edits I made were formatting. It was moving it into just something where it's bulleted, so that way it's easier to, if we're making changes for the sections the section headers to automatically update. So that's where that version, the December 29th draft, that's what that is. It's the old draft just with the changes that we voted on at the previous 2 meetings incorporated.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Because I'm not the liaison to the committee, but just as the council member, what is or has been the committee's draft process to date? Because you mentioned 3 different drafts, so do you all review the drafts and then are you going back and forth over email? Like, what's the process? I just want to get a sense of what's the process has been.
Well, maybe I could start answering that question. There was a draft voted on by a 5-0 vote, accepted by a 5-0 vote at the November 15th meeting of the committee. That was then presented to the council. There were strenuous objections by 2 council members, one of them you, to various aspects of the plan. I then, that pretty much ended the discussion at the council meeting. I then went back and, tried to answer the objections. And we had a committee meeting on December 13th, at which those objections were discussed, in light of the document that I had drafted, trying to answer those. And it appeared to me that at that time, that the objections had largely faded into the background and were no longer being pressed. And Arthur, who had raised these objections, seemed not to be pursuing them any longer, and indeed seemed to be accepting my answers, with one exception, and that's the issue of this exception to the curing provision. Largely, curing was accepted, but with respect to this one issue of unsigned ballot envelopes that were entirely unsigned, those were not to be cured. So that's, and, through my mistake, I failed to include that sentence and submitted it again, thinking that it was complete, to the to the council meeting in mid-December. I don't remember the exact date. And so at that point, all hell broke loose, and that's the draft that I thought we were working with tonight. So George has made numerous changes, obviously, to the current plan. I've compiled a partial list. Some of them are annotated. A large number of very significant ones are not. George will have to explain how it got from the December 16 draft to the current draft. And, it seems to me that George has not accounted for a good number of the changes that are manifest in this draft. And I'm quite concerned about them.
And that's where my question is because I'm hearing George and I'm hearing Peter, but where is Leah? And then Paul just mentioned the 2 different versions that he's looking at. So how is everybody weighing in on the committee? I know Natalie resigned, unfortunately, but what has been your structure back and forth?
Well, before you even go there, I'm not quite understanding how, in George's explanation, using the draft plan and making clarifications to it is now turned into a completely different plan, according to Peter.
Yes.
I would be happy to.
I didn't see that in what George provided over the holidays, and maybe I didn't look closely enough, but I didn't see that. I just know that the plan that was submitted to the council, and we, look, hindsight is 2020. We go back, maybe we should have just accepted it, and then we could have tweaked it. Maybe that would have been the best way, given the insertions that were made that were not accurate based on the votes in the committee. So maybe that's all we should have done. But I thought that was all that George in that drafting process was addressing. It was the insertion of the 30-day grace period that was not discussed, the curing, not curing ballots that were completely unsigned. That was not written the way it was voted on in committee.
That is true.
That was the, I thought that, and maybe there were.
One of the fatal flaws.
I'm sorry, Peter?
I'm sorry, that was the fatal flaw in the December 16 meeting, or one of the two. But Andrew, in response to what I understand to be your question, I would be delighted to be given an opportunity to read to the group the list of non-annotated variations from the December 16 plan that I have found. I don't think it's a complete list because there were complications in wording and organization. I was not able to be sure of other differences, but I think there are at least 9 that I consider quite significant that are completely at variance with any plan that this committee has at any time adopted. And so I don't understand how the December 16 plan modified by some earlier plan, the November plan, results in this. That just does not make sense to me. If I may, I'd like to read it. Would anybody be interested?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Well, can we, Marty's not on the committee, and I know he can't anymore, so I think
Whatever you like.
it goes to George
But
and the committee members.
Yeah,
they go to fundamental issues. And in
Understood.
fact,
I'm just
yeah,
saying.
Peter, real quick, can I jump in and finish answering Katie's question?
Sure.
So, Katie, the other bit of the review is when the draft was circulated to the other committee members and to Andrew into the committee box, I included a track changes version that had, here's all of the edits, and as I think I got them all, but I think for pretty much anything where language was changing, there was a comment attached to that saying, this change is made as per the vote we had at the December 13 meeting. This change as per conversation we had with during one of our November meetings with Niles about record keeping, et cetera, things like that. And then there was also a clean changes version that just had the comments that related to the agenda items for tonight. So grace period, timeline, vote changes, and having the ballot box available. So those went to the committee for everything on, I think, the 29th. So that was just the end point of my process. And so I just wanted to make sure you had that information about how the committee drafting process had gone.
Would it make sense, George, for you to share screen with that version for the committee to go through it, or is that too complicated or not large enough?
The track changes?
Yeah. So you can go through this document right now. Say this was raised. If the committee is surprised by a significant change that had not been discussed, you can discuss it. But I mean, that would allow the community then to see where the changes were made from the draft plan that was submitted to the council without having to look for them if they're in a document that's not been annotated.
Can I ask a question? Was there a December 29 meeting of the committee?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So has there been any meeting of the committee since the December 13th meeting?
No.
No.
Okay.
I see Marty is on, and Marty has also concerns, Peter, about this, which I think are some of the ones you have. So maybe she could also contribute. I don't know.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to comment here. The 22 plan as developed was much improved over the 21 plan, as I think any objective measure would show. And my concern is that I had actually taken the time as the concerned resident to go back and look at the December plan and look at the December 29th plan. Between the December 16th and December 29th, Peter is actually correct. There are major structural changes. For example, the line in the preamble that says the election committee is responsible for the accuracy of the voter roll, which has been a core tenet of VMA for 36 years. That has now been removed, and I know of no committee vote to remove that. Quite the contrary. It was an issue in last year's election because the unverified voter roll produced an awful lot of illegitimate ballots. And that's been an issue. It's part of having a clean, well-structured election, and the vote starts with a clean voter roll. And to remove that language from the preamble without a committee vote is really pretty egregious. The language about the voter roll is also removed later on in the document. Other changes are less structural, but equally important for voters. For example, the procedures that the 22 committee had in terms of how residents could submit questions for the forum. Last year was the first time that there were really pretty undue restrictions on residents' ability to submit forum questions. And the committee this year quite properly addressed that because the forum is important to voters and made sure that voters could submit their questions in many different forms, as had been true for the previous 35 years. And I was really happy to see that change in the 22 plan. That's now gone from the December 29th version of the plan, and I don't know of any committee vote on that. There are a number of other elements like that, some of them quite important to the character of the election in terms of having an open, independent election, access for candidates, access for voters, information for voters. The timeline changes, for example, when you move the timeline of the ballots being sent out earlier, that tends to favor incumbents. It's not a neutral election procedure. It tends to, the shorter the timeline between the announcement of the candidates and the receipt of ballots to be mailed, the more incumbents are favored. So there are real implications for some of these changes. And again, none of them seem to have been voted on at any meeting. Under the Open Meetings Act, when you have a 3-person committee, any 2 people is a quorum, which means that no 2 members of the committee can even talk to each other about any regulatory procedures without having an open meeting. And there have been no open meetings to make these pretty profound structural changes between the December 16th plan, which I read carefully, and the December 29th plan. I'd also like, there are a number of others. Peter came up with 9, and I came up with a couple more. Real structural changes that are not shown in any color coding on the draft document from the 29th. The other procedural issue I have here is just open public information, because the document that was produced on the 29th may have been circulated within the committee, but it was not available to the public. Niles first announced this January 6th meeting tonight in the weekly wrap-up on December 31st. That's great, that's good lead time. But there was no link in it to any documents. And I asked Niles, because I care about elections. I ran clean elections here for many years. And I've been working on elections since I was 19, which was a few decades ago. So I called Niles and I said, let me finish, please. I'd like a copy of this color-coded, annotated plan that they're talking about. And Niles kindly provided it to me. But it shouldn't be the case that every resident has to call the village manager for a copy. The actual link to that, the document you're talking about tonight, George, your December 29th version, with its really substantial changes from the December 16th version. First time a link to that was published was at 5:30 this evening, an hour and a half before this meeting. That is not good public information. I think the public needs a chance to look at this. And I think that Peter's comments about the substantive changes that were made are very questionable, because those changes were not made in any open meeting under the Open Meetings Act. They were not voted on by any previous incarnation of the 2022 election committee. And George, they're not annotated in your color-coded draft. So that strikes me as really a poor process and very worrisome, just as somebody who cares about good elections and good government process in general. Thank you.
Okay. So not responding to Marty, I'm treating this as the resident comment period portion of the meeting for notes. So before we fully dive into Andrew unpacking all of the issues, I want to make sure that other residents have an opportunity for the resident comment period that we kind of had put on the agenda, and make sure that everyone has an opportunity from the resident side to weigh in before we dive into breaking out all of the kind of the issues under discussion. It looks like Lynn, you had your hand up.
And
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I feel that the changes you've made were not handled in an open meeting by a quorum of the election committee, that all discussion of it should be terminated immediately because it has no valid basis, that you should just refer back to the December 20th agreements that were made and go with that. That there's no basis in validity for the substantial changes that you've made outside of the concept of open government. We're trying as a community to be more open, where all residents are aware of what's going on and not being given substantial changes at the 11th hour before a meeting, which is supposed to make a decision that impacts us all in a very important way. I totally resent the way this has taken place, and it is not the spirit in which I feel this community should be operated. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Jean had her hand up as well. So just let me know.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Andrew. I'll come back to you. Jean.
I have to agree with Marty's point and the point just made. Where has this been shared with the community? It's not supposed to be just coming from one person. I think the whole community should have seen this document as a paper document. And I just don't think it was done, and certainly not in time. As Marty says, 5 o'clock tonight or whatever, but it needs to be circulated in a better fashion. And then the issues of who was present when these decisions were made, it certainly doesn't seem the way the Open Meetings Act was intended to be used. So those are my comments so far.
Spoken like a former
Village
manager. And a good one too.
There you go. Thank you, Paul.
Hey, Andrew.
Okay, just real briefly, and I'm not a parliamentarian here, so I know the basic rules. Number one, this doesn't even go to the substance of it, because I was under the impression that the version that I was shared with was the exact same version with notes. But in terms of open meetings and residents being presented with a plan that had not been discussed before, well, this is the exact same process it was done previously, where committee members were doing passbacks and had one-on-one conversations that I believe led to Peter, under Peter's chairmanship, to a draft that was then discussed in an open meeting. It was not a done deal, it was a draft. That's why it's called a draft. So then committee members with input and feedback from residents could discuss. I believe it's the same process we're at right now. Again, notwithstanding whether we agree this is the same plan or not from the previous council meeting, but that's how it's done. If you want to be on the committee to do these passbacks for a draft and then sit on the committee, I encourage you to volunteer for it. But this is the venue we're at right now in an open meeting to discuss the existing draft with possible changes. So I witnessed the same process in the previous iteration of this committee, and I understand there are a group of people that feel very strongly that previous members were wronged. But again, there was no malign intent, or I think anything that was undermining the Open Meetings Act, and I think it's time to consider whether this draft can be looked at with those changes that had been inserted after the last committee meeting, and then presented to the council. I think that was the purpose of today's committee meeting, so that the council can then just take it into consideration. The fact that Peter has now recognized or identified 9 changes is new to me, so again, that's where we're at. So the process has not been any different in the lead up to this committee meeting.
I move to go over the draft. Is there anyone who would like to second that?
So I think, Leah, before we do, just finishing out resident comments, that Peter has his hand raised as a resident. He has the opportunity, and Susan also has the opportunity to comment, and then we can move into kind of the committee working session at that point, if that's okay with you.
Well, I feel like we're being asked to consider a draft
Peter,
that,
you're not being asked to consider anything. You're not in the committee.
yes, indeed. The committee is being asked to consider a draft in which they have not been informed of all of the changes that have been made. And that requires some subtlety. It requires a line-by-line comparison between the current proposed draft and the draft that was presented to the council in December. And, you know, I think just going over it may all sound very nice. The changes, the things that are missing, the things that have been manipulated are fundamental to the character of the election. And quite frankly, I think that they're worse. And, you know, because I think the committee is not in a position to be doing that line-by-line comparison under the current circumstances, I think I would propose that the committee instead be asked to, go back to the December 16 plan, and let's talk about the change or two that is of interest there with respect to the grace period and to the exception to the ballot curing provision. Nothing else is really. There are no other changes that have been adopted or proposed, or George has a plan that comes from no apparent source with quite a number of substantial items. And frankly, I would like to read those 9 items. The preamble paragraph at line 7 removes any reference to the committee's longstanding responsibility to be ultimately responsible for the accuracy of the voter roll. This has been controversial in the committee, not agreed upon, but it is fundamental to the character of the election. The 2021 election plan was the first time in VMA history that an election committee declined to acknowledge this responsibility that had been part of all prior elections, at least going back to 2015 and substantially before that as well. Second, all language pertaining to ballot.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Niles,
I think
in the
people
past,
want to hear
resident comment periods, resident comments have been asked to be limited for a certain time period, right?
Correct.
In
The
the interest
council
of
has done
ensuring that
that
everyone has
in
the
time.
opportunity to be heard. Peter, I know you have 9 things, and I have to imagine that is going to run well in excess of the
George,
standard
I would
time
ask
period
you to
for
listen to
president.
the 9.
Marty, can you let me finish talking
George,
real quick?
I would like to say that with respect to this business of giving residents a certain time period and then it's closed and only the committee members can discuss is, first of all, it's contrary to the committee practice up until now, where I have entertained questions from everybody as much as they wanted. And I think that's a substantial change, and one that is designed to quell dissent, to glide over objections. And these objections are quite substantial. And I object both to the overall nature of the meeting and to the sudden imposition of a discussion preventing measure to suddenly where there, it's going to be prevented for other people, people who've actually looked at this in detail, to really get into this. So I'm very concerned about the whole thing, and I voice my dissent. That is all I can say.
Thank you, Peter. Susan?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And George, you have so much credibility and legitimacy based on the work that you've done previously in this year's committee, particularly your taking of minutes. They are so detailed and so careful. I know that you, more than anyone, is aware, or you are aware, of the 8 votes taken at the November 15th meeting, and what the resolutions were and how they did to the content of the plan. I know that you're familiar with the 2 votes taken at the December 13th election committee meeting that spoke very directly to the information that should be in the plan. The proposal to that Arthur wanted to not cure unsigned ballot envelopes. I want to read from your minutes because it was good that you took such detailed minutes. You said, George, Arthur's proposal is not to cure unsigned ballot envelopes. George, I think that we should go forward with not curing unsigned ballots. Proposal is to remove the language that allows curing of unsigned ballots. Committee would continue to take all reasonable steps to address other issues such as smudged or water damaged signatures, family members using the wrong envelope, etc. George moves, Leah seconds. Vote is 4-1. So it's clear that there was a very specific thing said about the ballot curing. And last meeting of the council on December 16th, one of the main issues that was brought up is that the language of that proposal hadn't gotten into the plan as much as it should have. And we've heard the acknowledgement from the chair, Chair Khan, that he overlooked putting that sentence in. And then the other thing that was mentioned was the grace period of 30 minutes, that hadn't been voted on. Again, the chair had begun to introduce and explain that, why that was there, that they could go ahead and have a vote, or the committee could do what they wanted, but they were trying to address an issue. That was very upfront. He was explaining that at the last meeting, and it didn't get into the introduction, so he couldn't continue. So those 2 things are what the public, of the residents in the village, thought we were going to be going back to the plan to consider now. So when I saw the agenda that said something about voting on a vote counting procedure and a lot of other things, it raised a red flag for me. What's going on? And so I thought after the last meeting, which was so tumultuous, after the fog kind of settled from that, I thought it was so interesting that Andrew kept bringing up, the chair, council chair Andrew Calders kept bringing up that he wasn't sure that this was all voted on because this 1 or 2 items had been flagged for him and maybe the whole thing wasn't representative. He was concerned. So let's just take him at his word. He just wanted to go back for a vote on those things, making sure that this was truly representing the committee. Well, we find out, if you go through the minutes, you realize this was voted on. It was simply a matter of the one thing, the 30-minute thing, had not been, and that was the one that was going to be explained. The other one was the curing of the ballot. So that's all there was. There wasn't a lot of other material. And so that's why a red flag was raised for me when, at the meeting, even though Andrew, or Chair Calders, was talking about, we just need to go back to a vote, and then we could deal with this. What's the big deal? But then 2 committee members and 1 or 2 council members immediately, instead of saying we need to make this even more accurate, because I thought that's what they were talking about. I think that's what the chair of the council thought he was talking about. Let's make this more accurate to the will of the committee. They immediately toggled into saying, let's just go with the 2021 plan. The effect of doing that was to totally undercut the entire work of this year's election committee. So instead of making it more accurate, the immediate thing that was talked about, which didn't make sense to me until I thought about it afterwards, what you were really saying is, let's just undo entirely, do a completely unrepresentative process of what went on and what they voted for this year. So to me, there was a kind of deceptiveness there. You were talking about the grace period, talking about not curing unsigned ballots, adding that to make it even more reflective of the will of what we were doing this year, but then toggling immediately to let's just readopt the 2021 plan, undercut the credibility and legitimacy of what you were doing. So if we were here today looking at the plan that you talked about at the last meeting that most people anticipated they were going to be looking at and voting on this grace period, 30-minute grace period topic, and looking at how language might be included to better reflect what I just read about the proposal on unsigned ballots, then there wouldn't be an issue. But unfortunately, so much substantive stuff, we've talked about the voter roll, we've talked about conflict of interest forms, and many other things were added and not even annotated in a way that highlighted them on the draft. So that's it's deceptive, and it's not right. It's bait and switch. These are I've highlighted these two problems. If you cared about really making them better, you could have gone to the chair. There was time. He could have changed something. There was a choice to go to the chair of the council instead of your own chair to make those better. And there was a choice to wait until that meeting. So there was a delay. And now we have it, now there's a crisis. We have to do this right away. So my concern is that the way that was done, the way that you did an end run around the chair to begin with those two topics, presented them to the village as though they created some question about whether the whole thing was representative, even though we had 10 votes on it over the course of a month. Hundreds of hours of work went into this. I can tell you that Thanksgiving vacation from morning to night for people in my family was devoted, and almost every day of November was devoted to working on this plan. It did not just take a few hours, okay? So to throw all of that work, all of that representation of resident interest, and you all did such a beautiful job, George, the whole committee, Leah, everyone came together. 8 of the 10 votes on this plan were 5-0. 2 of the votes were 4-1. That represents a massive amount of work to get people together, to agree on things. It's a compromise. It's not just what you want, but it's a compromise. And if we had that here, it would enhance your credibility and legitimacy. But if you dump that and go back to some other draft that we're not told about, I'm really concerned that it could undercut your credibility. And I know you're just starting out, this new committee. So I'm confident you can do the right thing. You know what's in what should be in that draft based on the minutes. And let's just go back to the December 16th. I would encourage council members and committee members to just go back to the December 16 draft and talk about the 3 things: the grace period, the curing unsigned ballots, if you wanted to add some language, and maybe one other thing someone talked about. Do that and you'll have something that brings people together. And otherwise, I think we've got a little bait and switch going on that I'm not comfortable with. Thank you.
I just want to say real quickly, I'm sorry. I'm completely offended by this. Susan, I know that I'm not sure what your intent was, but as a member of the council, when you use certain words, there are undertones there that assume malintent, and there was no malintent here. Perhaps it was an oversight, but George, I won't even include myself. Everyone else on this committee has worked very hard, including our former chair. But please be careful with the language you select, because we have been meeting hours and hours and hours. I don't have more hours to give to this. I have a life outside, and for you to use the language that you just used to describe George and his purpose to deceive is completely inappropriate. So can we just assume best intent here, please? And maybe there were some oversights. We can go back and review, but to use that kind of accusatory language is completely inappropriate. We're all here as volunteers. Let's remember that.
And can I just quickly say, Susan, maybe you weren't on when I opened up here and said that best of intentions is what I expect everyone has here in this process. In as much as you point a finger at George and others maybe as being deceptive, when all we did during the council meeting was say there were items inserted or missed or not inserted actually and not reflect a vote that was had by the committee, and that draft plan was provided to the council. No one said that Peter was being deceptive. We just said it was not accurate to the votes that were held in the committee. Okay, so I would just ask that we lower the temperature here. I'm sorry about your Thanksgiving, but you reflected my words very accurately in that council meeting and subsequent conversations. That all I think that needs to be done here It's those two items. There may have been one or two other little items that need to be tweaked based on a draft plan that was submitted where there were items that had not been voted on or were voted on with different language. So that is what I thought the purpose of this committee meeting was. If we're not going anywhere, we can also, as a council, just decide we take that draft plan and we make those tweaks ourselves. I don't know what the process would be there, but that could save us a whole lot of time. But I, again, don't want to Bigfoot the committee process. That's why this committee meeting is happening.
Let me second that, Andrew. A very quick suggestion. We have a committee, we have a forum. Let's get on with the meeting. Conduct your business, and I suggest the rest of us sit back and listen and let the committee do their work. You have a quorum to go, you have a chairman. Good luck and get to work. And I am now bowing out of it and will be listening.
Thanks, Arthur. This is Jeff Lander, and I just want to echo my thoughts here. And again, Andrew, I want to just really echo, how much effort you've put in to being this great arbiter in chief and really trying to reduce the tone, the finger pointing, those perceptions. And obviously we still have, some temperature and air pressure we need to release. But, Andrew, I do say that maybe one thing to consider, I like it, is, perhaps we do go back to the draft that everyone agrees on was voted, and then there were some of these potential edits that have to be made, and those could be handled directly by the council working with Ron. This is the process we did last year. The whatever draft we say we go back to that had those edits that need to be incorporated, well, there's nothing that says that you can't introduce that and then we work with Ron. It could be in real time. We could have a special session. And frankly, the committee itself doesn't have to go through this experience. And, the one thing that concerns me a bit, but, I'll just leave it out there is, perhaps George, and again, the great respect you, Leah, others, all the time that has gone into this, perhaps, George, when you have a chance as the new chair, to just share those edits. And I think the concern about how come they were first posted perhaps to the public at 5:30. But again, Andrew, I'm going to pause here, and I apologize. I'm running another board meeting I have to jump to in just a minute. Maybe consider that. Maybe how do we take the temperature? How do we reduce it? How do we take out the air pressure? I mean, if there's a version that we could refer to, maybe it's the job of the council working with our attorney to make the edits that the council themselves had asked for, and then perhaps any of these discrepancies between language, which in good faith we can make. And I think that's the process that essentially we had gone through last year and call it a wrap. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.
So it could also take that bullseye off this committee. But I think if there's a way to go through the committee process, great. But let's not reinvent the wheel after all that work was put in. I'm happy to take on that bullseye if we think that this can't be done during this meeting because everyone's up in arms. I'm happy to take that last draft and have the committee in open session with Ron, however the process needs to happen. Just look at that, those 2, 3, 4 lines, whatever they were, and that might be it. Just address them. That was my goal, and that would simplify it all, and we can carry it with our lives.
We have a committee, we have a chair, we have a process, we have a quorum. Let the committee do their work. Then we'll see what happens.
Well, I would just say to address what Susan had mentioned earlier, on December 16th, I was prepared to go and vote on the December 16th plan. And so, I'm sorry by what happened, what we all witnessed. It was a debacle. It's unfortunate that it resulted in resignations of this committee. But number one pet peeve of mine as a working mom is wasted time. So I agree. Let's just address the few points that were brought to our attention that night and acknowledge the previous committee of 5 members, all the time and effort and hard work that they put into this plan. And I think that's what we should be looking at. And that's just my 2 cents. And again, I'm sorry that it resulted in resignation. I hope this isn't a trend that happens with our committees going forward.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So I think we're ready to move into actually addressing and working on the draft. Okay, dropping into working on the draft.
Lynn Willie has his hand up.
Lynn, is that a new comment, or was that still from, I thought that was from earlier.
Ask him. I'm going to ask him to unmute just to respond to that. Whether he.
This is a new thing.
Okay. Go ahead, Lynn.
At the beginning of the current Martin's Edition Council, when they had their first meetings, the timing as to residents' comments was changed from the past to 2-minute limit, where somebody was cut off before they even had a chance to take their second breath. And that is a tone that was implemented, and I think welcome, and I think had been consistent since those first council meetings throughout the process, even with committee meetings that were open to the public. I don't understand why for this meeting we're reverting back to the old, cut you off before you even get started. I think it should continue with the suggestion made by Andrew and not dissented to by the other council members, that when someone has someone to speak, they should be allowed to complete whatever they have to say. Your having cut off Peter tonight, I think, is totally inappropriate and not consistent with the mood and tone that we are trying to set for official Martin's Edition meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, moving into resident comment, or out of resident comment and into discussion of the election plan. It's 8 o'clock. We've had resident comments for an hour. There will be additional opportunity for resident comment later in the meeting, but at a certain point, the election committee needs to get on with its business. And I feel like I've given people more than enough opportunity at this point to raise comments at the beginning of this meeting, and there will be more opportunity later in the meeting for people to raise comments. But at a certain point, I think Paul, Leah, and I need to actually have a meeting and start discussing the issues that are up in the air relating to the election plan.
I object.
Then it goes. I appreciate the service that you provided to the
So
committee,
now,
but you are not on the committee anymore.
But there has been no
and
response
it is time for the 3
the
committee
chair.
members to begin their work.
So now what's going to happen is, now that you've heard our comments, you will ignore them and go ahead and adopt a completely different plan.
Peter,
we have a
not on the
committee
committee
going.
anymore.
Niles, can you
Yeah.
please mute all non-committee members, including myself?
and I'm going to say this once. I can speak for myself, and I'm reasonably confident I can speak this for Leah and Paul. All of us are adults. All of us are more than capable of having heard the comments that were made and taking them under consideration. Just because we do not wind up doing everything that you have asked does not mean that your comments were not heard, does not mean that your comments were not considered, and does not mean that your comments were not valued by the committee members. Okay. So moving into discussion of the election plan, in the email that I had sent, Paul, to you and Leah, I had highlighted 4 issues. If you guys don't have any objection, I wanted to run through those 4, and then I think we can drop into some kind of issues after that.
Please do.
Okay, so the first one up relating to, sorry, I'm pulling out my notes on it. Okay, relating to the timeline. There's a couple of sub bits in here. In the draft plan, line 57, who can vote? The question around when does the voter roll close? I think we had previously, the last version of the council had said election night. There was a previous draft before that it said the voter roll closes 7 days prior to the election. The draft currently reflects saying changes can be made, people can be added to the voter roll up through 8 p.m., which I think is where we had designated, end of the election night event with the drop box where people can be added or ask for new things to be mailed to them at that point. I wanted to put this up for a vote of, because there was the discrepancy between the two previous drafts, are we in agreement that we're saying people can request to be added to the voter roll up through the close of the election night event, so 8 p.m. on election day?
That seems very difficult to me to go right up until the end of the period, under the day. I don't know.
Would it be something that might work better for closing kind of earlier in the day on election day for having people added to the roll?
I think so. Yes. For me.
Leah, what are your thoughts?
Leah, what do you think, Leah?
Yeah, I agree. It seems like it would be challenging to have it so late. Have it open so late.
Okay, what about we say maybe noon on election day, and that gives us some time, and we make sure that we're not running into any issues of simultaneously trying to be monitoring the table and also be adding people to the voter roll at the same time.
I think noon sounds reasonable. What do you think about, like, I don't know, Paul, what do you think? I was thinking noon, or is 5 too late? What is considered end of business?
I guess I'm not sure it needs to be put in there, but what do you think? Do we need a definite time in there?
I had said noon just because I think at 5 is when the box opens, and I think at that point the 3 committee members are probably trying to manage the drop box at the table and everything that entails. So I'd said noon just so that way we're done and dusted with any adds to the voter roll before we get into actually having to manage kind of election day event.
That makes sense. I'm on board with that.
What do we say? What do we say in the December 16th draft on that one?
I can find. I think that one said there was language around up through the end of the election period. So that's where the 8 p.m. in the 29th in the December 29th draft, that was reflective of what was in the one on the 16th, but that was different than the one that we had voted on in November. So that's where I wanted to flag it for discussion tonight.
The one we voted on, and I quote, new voters may request to be added to the voter roll up to the evening of election day, and a mail-in ballot will be forwarded to them by the election service provider, is what we had and approved on that. I don't know. I guess I would defer back to what we had on the 16th of December.
All right, so Paul, I think that I'm pulling out my track changes. I think that was one that I had changed because just changing it from evening to putting a time on it, because that was my best interpretation that evening meant through the end of the election period, because that's the evening. And so we can say 8 p.m. if we want to run it through the end. We can say close of business. We can say noon. The November draft, that was the one before that, was said 7 days in advance at close of business, which I thought we didn't want to do. So if we want to say 8, we can do that. I think personally, I think that presents a couple of logistical issues, but if we want to say close of business, that's also fine.
Yeah, I would defer back to the one we had before.
Okay, so close of business.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
What it says is up until the evening of election day. I know that's not very specific, but it is flexible. That's an issue. I'm not sure is that critical in this whole thing. And Leah, do you have any specific feeling on that? You're muted.
Oh, yep. I'm asking her to unmute. I was just looking for something.
Thank you. I mean, I tend to agree with George. I think it's important to have a deadline. That's why I was asking, like, what time is the end of business? Because I don't want to be ambiguous. So I'm fine with noon. I think it makes sense. Paul, do you feel like that's too early?
No, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't seem that important to me.
Okay.
Because that's where I'm coming from. But
All right, so I'm gonna motion that I amend that section to say maybe add it to the voter roll up through 12 p.m. on election day.
I second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
so you're up to midnight is what you're saying.
12 p.m.
Noon.
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 Okay. Up till noon. All right.
So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thanks. Okay. Second one is lines 73 and 74.
How about 66 to 69?
Yeah, Paul, so that was, I'm not going through the document chronologically, I'm going through it issue specific. That's the 66 to 69 is the one that I was going to discuss when we got to putting the ballot box out earlier.
Okay.
So it's, I think it was, 73 to 74. The draft currently says that if a voter is planning not to be at his or her VMA address during the voting process, he may elect to receive a ballot at a different location by informing the committee no later than 5 p.m. on May 3rd, so a week before the deadline. Do we want to keep that as May 3rd, or do we want to move that to May 10th and move it to May 10th at election day? Do we want to keep it the same? Do we want to move it to May 10th and say also at noon, so it's the same as adding to the voter roll?
I would go with the noon, I guess.
Same.
Okay. Okay, so I motion that I will make a change to that line to, sorry, I'm trying to write and talk at the same time. I motion that we adjust that line so that it says that the deadline for requesting a ballot be sent to a different location is noon on election day.
Leah, can I ask a question in the public here? Do you feel comfortable with this procedure that we're doing right now? It seems to me that we're not prepared to vote with 3 members, and also with the fact that we're not so sure. We haven't really looked at this. Speak of. Are you comfortable with this? I guess what I'm leaning toward is I just think that the committee needs to get their act together before we go, and then put it out to the membership or into the constituency.
I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable. I mean, I'm comfortable with us going line by line on the things that need to be voted on. Are you uncomfortable, Paul?
A bit, yes. I'm glad. You know, I'm looking at two different documents here, and we're modifying and changing the document that we'd already voted on, which is what we talked about earlier here. And I don't feel comfortable changing what the full committee agreed to a month ago. But you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want to take a lot more time, but it seems to me we just need to sit down and discuss this together, come up with a final draft, and then put that out to the constituency for feedback, because we can't get feedback right now from Peter and others.
Well, I think we can vote on this, and then we can have our version out for feedback, right? The vote, the things that we're voting on now. But I think we need to have a draft for people to be able to give feedback on.
I don't know about you, but I've received several detailed emails within the last 48 hours, being very uncomfortable with the document that we are voting on right now, and they are very specific in their discussion and in their opposition to what we're doing, and I'd like to have their input in some way. Have you received any input from from constituents and Martin's Additions on this?
Yes.
Yeah, I have too.
I have. I don't know, George, have you?
No.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why Paul and I did, but not you.
Yeah, I'm a little curious about that. And with seeing some of the comments that have come through, Paul, I think function. I mean, that you said, the three of us need to sit down and hash this stuff out. I think that's what we're doing right now is, trying to talk through the outstanding issues. Whatever we wind up deciding and putting the draft together, will get, it'll be circulated internally to make sure that you guys have a chance to look and say, okay, is this reflective of what we voted on? And then it would go up to the council. They introduced it, and then they have the opportunity to hear and public comment at that point, and additional amendments and changes can be made to the plan at the council level as well. And so there will be additional opportunity for public comment. But
I guess my point is that when each of these changes that have been made here that we're taking one by one, I have specific written opposition to, that I'd like to consider in a discussion on each of these, because I really don't feel professionally competent in this area. Maybe I shouldn't even be on this committee, but but if Leah feels that we should move ahead, I guess I can go with that. But I just don't feel.
I don't want you to feel like I'm steamrolling. Like, if you have personal concerns, if you have concerns that people have raised about some of these, about the changes that we're in the process of discussing, like, I would love to hear them. I mean, I don't want you to feel like I'm steamrolling you. I want to make sure that we're addressing these as they come up.
Well, I guess I really haven't prepared on the one for one. I have page after page on some of these, and but
George, maybe you want to share your screen so Paul can see what you're looking at. But if you're comfortable, if not, it's okay.
Yeah, would that help, Paul?
If you could see the process that George is following.
Well, again, I don't feel comfortable with being able to take the opposition points specifically on these lines, because I haven't put enough time into it, I guess. But I don't want to draw this thing out. We put a lot of hours into this thing already, so.
Paul, are the opposition points related to the elements under that we're discussing right now, or are they related to the draft version of the plan?
That's, I think both, and that's what I feel uncomfortable with, because I'm not sure it's a definite reference to the changes that have been made here in their opposition. So I don't know. I feel very uncomfortable with this, but if we vote here tonight on acceptance of these changes, we certainly need to put it out for input from the people who have made input to me already. And I don't feel comfortable with one-on-one right now, because they don't marry up, in other words, line by line. I don't know. I'm uncomfortable.
So Paul, the approach that I had envisioned when I put together the agenda, and the approach that I think has generally been followed in the past. So what we're doing right now is we have the draft starting point. We're going to go through and discuss specific changes to it, but then once we have made those changes, then it is a discussion of consideration of the plan as a whole, which we would then vote on, saying, okay, with those changes all incorporated, are we saying this is the plan that is ready to move forward? So it's a first track and then a second track. The first track is specific edits to the draft and just how do we feel about these? And then the second track is, are we good with this version as a whole, and saying this is the final version that we are sending up, so that way it's not in the packet at the next committee meeting or at the next council meeting. There's a bunch of stuff in there that's not, that we're saying, wait, where did that come from? Like, that's why I wanted to walk through kind of the individual changes to the draft first, and then consideration of the draft as a whole, with the idea being these are edits to the December 29th version that I had sent out that incorporated the changes from our November meetings and the changes from our December meeting.
Well, these changes are not the committee's changes, the full committee's changes. So, and I don't feel confident, quite frankly, on voting on these. But let's move ahead, Leah, if you want to move ahead.
So, Paul, I would say these.
Yeah, let's move ahead. I think we should move ahead. Changes. Let's vote. Let's get some stuff to council. They can open it up to the community, and then we can. They can raise concerns or take issue or do whatever at that point. But I think we have to keep this ball rolling.
Okay, so I think the last thing I had said was I had motioned to make the change to the deadline for people to request that a ballot be sent to a different location than the one on the voter roll, moving that from May 3rd at 5 p.m. to May 10th at 12 p.m.
I don't have any problem with that. I mean, that's simple. That makes sense.
Second, do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. The next one is request for replacement ballot deadlines, which is line 75 and 76 in the plan. If a voter has lost or damaged his or her ballot, you may contact the committee no later than 8 p.m. on May 10th to request a replacement ballot. Are we good with that? That was one where there was some different language in some of in between the earlier drafts. That gives them, I think that was what we had largely agreed to at the previous meetings, was that that's what at the table we have an opportunity for people to come down and say, my ballot was damaged. I would like a new one mailed to me up through 8 p.m. Are we good with saying 8 p.m.?
It sounds fine. George, do you think that there is another time that would be better?
No, I think running it through the end of the evening works. I think the only potential wrinkle that we'll have to account for in just our election day process, as opposed to in the plan, is whether or not people have to request in person for that evening portion, or whether or not they can shoot it. They can send us an email at 7:50 on election night, and we need to run it through the process at that point. But I think that's something we can iron out that kink later. I just wanted to make sure that we're all good with unifying that request for a replacement ballot can go through 8 p.m. on election night.
Yeah, what the committee agreed to was that it would be no later than election day, May 10th, 2022. They don't have any specific hour, and that's okay. You know, being an old military guy, I think a specific hour is always good anyhow. So.
Okay. So I motion that the language on request for replacement ballots be 8 p.m. on election day.
Second.
I agree.
All in favor?
Right.
Aye. Okay. So the last one reflected in the draft, so the vote counting session. In the last two drafts, it was ballots were due to the provider on the 23rd. We counted and we would kind of convene to accept that all the ballots had gotten in on the 23rd. And then we counted on the 26th, which was leaving that multiple day period for ballot curing. At our last meeting, when we voted that we were going to get rid of the signature ballot curing stuff, which is the only one that required multiple days of us being able to do that outreach, we got rid of that. So I wanted to see, do we want to keep vote counting? Ballots are due on the 23rd, vote counting on the 26th, or do we say now we can condense that and just say votes are due to the vendor by 5 p.m. on May 23rd, and we'll count that night?
I prefer to count that night.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
Okay. So I motion that I will make the change to the draft that moves vote counting from the 26th to the 23rd without moving the ballot delivery to the vendor due date off of at 5 p.m. on May 23rd. It's the same one, but we will count night of the 23rd instead of night of the 26th. So motion.
Yes. Second.
Leah seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Okay. So I think that is it for timeline. Okay. So going back to what Paul had mentioned earlier, making the ballot box available prior to election day with the green highlight. So that's green highlighting. So that's in two places. It's lines 66 to 69 and lines 138 to 140. So election procedures subsection 5. Paul, that was something that we had discussed at the last meeting, that you had expressed an interest in, that we can make the ballot box available not for people to drop off their ballots, not just on election day, but during a period leading up to election day. So that's where that's some draft language, which says the committee may also provide opportunity for qualified voters to drop off their completed ballot envelopes in the ballot box at the village office during a period prior to election day.
Yeah. How can I vote against that? It's my idea.
Well, does that language work for the two of you? I talked to Niles briefly about, I think we're going to have some options with when exactly we put it out, where it is, how often we come down to, clear out the box and count and say, okay, there were 15 envelopes in as of this date. I think we've got some options with that, but I think that's all stuff that we can iron out down the road because that's a little more administrative. But do you guys have any changes to that proposed language?
I don't know.
I don't either.
Okay. I motion that we will add the language that is currently in the draft version, line 66 to 69, and election procedures subsection 5, so 138 to 140. I motion that we add that to the draft.
Right. Leah, do you have a cold or what? I feel so bad for you. What, you poor thing.
I think I have a sinus infection. I've had 3 negative COVID tests.
You're muted. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Paul. All in favor? Aye. Paul, is that an aye, I presume?
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is that an aye for?
Yes, well, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Sorry, I missed you. I'm trying to take notes. Okay. Okay. So the next one up is the grace period. So that's highlighted in blue. It's lines 88 to 90 and 96 to 98 in the draft plan. So that was language that we have kind of talked around, but we never actually voted on adding. So it is for nominations and then nominations documents with their 2 separate deadlines. Do we want to add a grace period? The draft just says 30. We can make it 5. We can make it 10, 15, whatever we want to make it. But do we want to add language relating to a grace period for those submissions? I think I had laid out my comments for you guys. I think there's functionally kind of 3 options. Either we don't do a grace period, we have an automatic grace period, or we do a grace period where it's discretionary, where the committee has the option to extend a grace period to someone for those. So I think those were the 3 options that I had laid out. If someone has a different one, please let me know.
I would do the latter, the option. The committee has the option.
The committee has the discretion.
Discretion, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be one where the language would change to the committee has the option
Discretion.
to extend a 30-minute grace period or 15 or 5-minute grace period to allow for email nominations and then to allow for email submissions to reach their box by a vote of the committee. I think we would run into something of whether or not we would have to have a meeting to agree to vote on extending the grace period. Because I don't think that's Niles, would that be something that we would be able to vote on administratively?
So I think that is a sort of a complicated thing. I think if you say the one thing that you could have it as administrative is if you set some kind of, if there is some policy for what the discretion is, like as in, for example, if a candidate has informed the committee and they have a valid reason for why they're delaying it, then I think as long as it fits in that criteria that has already been approved, then you could potentially do yes, we're extending it because this circumstance meets the already approved provision. You see what I'm saying? Like, so for example, if somebody said, like, I think, this is sort of what Katie had talked about. She had to go to the hospital, or a family member had to go to a hospital on the night of the deadline. They could just quickly say, I'm in the hospital, right? And then it could, under that criteria, then you could say, yes, we're extending it under, sort of predetermined format. Whereas I think having a numbered saying it's 30, giving a 30-minute grace period eliminates that ambiguity of under what circumstances. Because that's really, you want to make it fair to everyone. So it can't just be arbitrarily, Yes, we're extending it 30 minutes because we all agree. That's, to me, the more particulars there.
Yeah, I think we should do like a 30-minute grace period.
So, Leah, you're saying look, it's 30 minutes for everybody. We extend it for that no matter what. We're not saying it's got to be for reasons X, Y, or Z. It's just 30-minute grace period for everyone.
Yeah, I think it would be across the board. We don't want to show, like preferred treatment or.
But the number of minutes, does that make any difference? I mean, what if you had a ratio and trees are coming down all over the place like I have living here at Martin's Edition? 30 minutes? I mean, as opposed to the committee having the ability to take time.
So, Paul, I think something like that. If there's a massive incident, right? That's an emergency situation. Emergencies take precedent in other ways, right? That's a decision in emergency circumstances where you can say, people don't have power, then we change what we're doing or things like that.
Yeah.
But if you're having a general rule, there's two different questions, I think, from a policy point of view. In emergency situations, you act in an emergency capacity. You can say, we're extending the deadline a week because no one has power, whatever you have to do. But in terms of a standard thing, that's the question.
So it's taken for granted, emergency comes in, okay.
Right. In general, I would say yes, because there's certain ways where in emergency situations, things have to, there's all kinds of things, when you declare an emergency or something like that, you can act a little bit differently, even if it is calling a meeting, if you have to that day and say, the power is out, we have to make a meeting, here's what they decide. Those are special circumstances. I think the question, from a policy point of view, the question of the day-to-day, that's sort of what this plan takes into account, is sort of the regular incidents.
Yeah, Paul, my thinking was in line with kind of Leah, based off what Niles was just talking about, where I think the 30-minute grace period that kind of triggers automatically allows for individual cases, and we would wind up having to meet if there was something that was going to trigger for a widespread issue. There's a major power outage, there's somebody doing construction knocks out internet access for half the village, et cetera. I think that's something where we would have to meet, because then we'd want to probably extend it more than 30 minutes at that point. If it's the true, if it's an emergency that's going to apply to a lot of people, I think the 30-minute just auto grace period would catch individual cases.
I agree.
Oh, does that sound okay with you, or?
That's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So then I would motion, it's the language that's in the December 29th draft, the proposed language, 30-minute grace period will be allowed for email nominations to arrive to the committee's email inbox. And then in the section below, a 30-minute grace period will be allowed for email submissions to arrive in the committee's email inbox. So I would motion that we add those two sections to the draft.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. The last one up is it's one that I had flagged in gray. It's the vote counting procedures. So the first place on it is lines 125 to 127, election procedures, section 3, subsection B, and subsection C. So that has to do with, in the previous two drafts, there was language that said, promptly at 8 p.m. on election night, the election committee will open the ballot box, count the number of ballot return envelopes in the box, set aside any non-conforming ballot envelopes for review, and then convey them over. What I'm proposing is, since we are, the first change for this one is, do we want to go through the box and be tagging and saying non-conforming, 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 or do we want to send all the envelopes to the ballot vendor and then they do the non-conformity check in line with the guidance we give them on the ones in the box and the ones that they're getting by mail? So the proposal is to strike the language that says set aside any non-conforming ballot envelopes for review, e.g. envelopes that are not sealed or that do not bear a control number provided by the election service provider.
So would the process be, if all the non-conforming ones go to the vendor, then would they bring them back to us for the ones that are?
Can I touch here?
So that's in line with kind of what happened last year. So it would be, we send them everything that's in the box. Like we just go through, we count and say, okay, there were 180 envelopes in the box today. We put them all into the container, we seal that up, we convey it over to the vendor. Whether that's mailing it or whether or not we have a rep from the election service provider at the event and we seal up the box and give it to them. We give them kind of the guidance, and at the start of election counting night, then they would go through and they would check all the envelopes and sort out, these are the non-conforming envelopes, these are the conforming envelopes, and then presumably they, present each non-conforming one to us. We make a determination and say that is curable, or not curable, but that is, we're accepting that, we're not accepting that, based on the guidance we put into play that we've already had in place, and kind of vote counting procedures that we're going to have to agree to at some point. But all the ballots come back to us at the end. The non-conforming ones, the conforming envelopes that are opened, and the ballots are all part of the records retention, and all of that has to come back to us at the end.
I think for continuity purposes, it makes sense to send everything to the vendor.
That was my thinking, is rather than we're doing non-conformity checks on some and they're doing non-conformity checks on others, I think it makes sense that they all be done by the same people under the same kind of guidance, the same look. Yeah. But was my thinking. Paul, what do you think?
Oh, I think that makes sense.
Okay. So I motion that we strike the language in election procedures. Sorry, I gave the wrong section earlier. I said it was 3. This is in subsection 4. So I propose we strike, set aside any non-conforming ballot envelopes for review, parentheses, e.g. envelopes that are not sealed or do not bear a control number provided by the election service provider, end parentheses. So I propose we strike that from election procedures, subsection 4.
Why? Why would you not have check and balance on that to look at the ones that have been found to not be acceptable?
So that's what we just talked about, and saying we're not going to do a check on election night and sort for ourselves, these are conforming, these are non-conforming. It's we send everything to the vendor, and the vendor does the check for non-conforming by basically putting them into the same process that they're using on all the ones that are just mailed to the vendor.
Yeah, so it's like it's more consistent if we have one group looking at all of them versus us looking at some and then them doing some. And then the ones that are non-conforming then, or the ones that they flag as non-conforming then are given back to us.
And just for clarity, in each of the last 2 years, that's what was done. It was all sent to the vendor. There was no Dropbox either, but it was all sent to the vendor, and then they showed you on Zoom. They showed you the non-conforming ballots, and then the committee would vote on it.
Does that make sense, Paul? They're still being checked, but it's instead of we're doing a check and they do a check on theirs, we just have all of them be checked in the same way.
We're checking what they have determined, right? I mean, we're the final check on it. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just getting rid of the language that says we check for non-conforming on election night. They all go over there and they will flag there's no non-conforming that we don't get eyes on. Whatever non-conforming envelopes they flag, we have to look at and then make a determination on. So this isn't getting rid of a check for non-conforming or adjudicating non-conforming. It's just saying we're not initially screening out on election night. They're all just screened on vote counting night.
That makes sense.
Okay, so I motion to make that change. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. So, okay. The next one is the one with this one goes back to the section I had flagged. So lines 125 to 127, election procedures, section 3, sub B, sub C. In the old draft, these were a parenthetical. What I am proposing is changing them from being a parenthetical into bullets. So in the old draft, so it now says all ballot envelopes must be received by the election service provider no later than 5 p.m. on May 23rd, 2022. Ballots received after that time shall be rejected and not included in the ballot counting. Sub A, ballots must be returned in the service provider issued return envelope. That was already a sentence in there, but I am proposing in the old draft, there was a parenthetical that said relating to non-conforming that said ballot return envelope. And so it's saying we're going to change that from parenthetical to sub bullets. It is now would be sub B, ballot return envelopes must be sealed. Sub C, ballot return envelopes must bear a valid control number that has not been canceled or voided.
Makes sense.
Leah?
Agreed. Oh, Paul,
Okay, I motion to make that change and include the proposed language.
Sorry.
Sorry, Leah, what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said I motion to include the proposed language.
Oh, I agree.
Do I have a second?
Oh, sorry. I second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. By the way, I wanted to make a joke earlier. If I could be John. Can I be John? You get it?
Yeah.
George, Paul, John, Ringo.
We do need a Ringo. We might have to dress Niles up as Ringo.
I could be a Ringo too. I'm pretty short.
Okay. Then the last one of the ones I had laid out ahead of time was proposed language for election procedures, section 7. It would be proposing to add sub B, so that's lines 150 to 154, saying prior to the counting of the ballots, the committee shall approve procedures to govern the review of ballot return envelopes and ballots, the identification of issues in non-conforming ballot return envelopes and ballots, adjudication of any issues, and the counting of the votes, and proposed language. So that's basically saying at some point before vote counting night, the committee will discuss, develop, and approve via public meetings vote counting procedures. Last year we had a set of vote counting procedures that we did. So I don't think it makes sense to lay out the actual procedures yet because some of that will be dependent on the election vendor. So we could just leave this blank and it's an assumed authority that we will at some point go through and lay out vote counting procedures, or we can specify in this that we are going to build out vote counting procedures at some point. And that's basically just I can share, I think they're in our committee files, but last year the vote counting procedures were pretty explicit. It is step 1, the vendors will take all the ones. Step 2, we will, vote and say, yes, that is how many ballot envelopes. Step 3, the vendors will check for these 8 things. Step 4, they will show us any non-conform, et cetera. And it runs through a very explicit process of what all happens on the night. So I put this in as just, clarifying that we're going to do it. We can drop it, and it's just kind of understood that that's an administrative part of our responsibilities, that we don't need to add this language and just say, we're going to build the vote counting procedure at some point, but we don't necessarily need to put that in the plan. Niles has his finger out.
Yeah. Point of clarification: the vote counting procedures last year were approved by the council. So
yeah.
To do it the same way, you could have the language to say the committee will propose vote counting procedures to be approved by the council. Something like that. So it is a responsibility that was carried out by the committee last year, but was voted on by the council.
Okay. Thank you, Niles. So that could be a potential change, so that it would instead say, prior to the counting of the ballot, the committee shall, or the council shall approve vote counting procedures?
You could say it that way. That's probably the clearest language. Or you could say that the committee shall propose procedures for the council to adopt, something like that. Either way, the council just has to do it. It's their responsibility.
Okay. So, Paul, Leah, how would you feel if it's amended to say, instead of the whole paragraph now, it just says, prior to the counting of the ballots, the committee shall propose procedures to the council for the council to adopt relating to the vote counting?
That works.
Okay.
It's a good check and balance.
Okay, then I motion that we add in section 7 sub B the language that I just detailed. So prior to the counting of the ballots, the committee shall propose procedures for the council to adopt relating to the vote counting.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, the other one that was raised earlier that during voting, or during the resident comment period, that I wanted to flag was a grace period for curing of nominations and election, or in the conflict of interest forms. There's not really curing of the nomination, because it's functionally just someone has to convey to us in any way that they want that they're going to run. But that was something that had shown up in one of the drafts that I don't think we had discussed and voted on before. We discussed grace periods around the nomination materials being submitted, but not a process by which we're notifying someone that their conflict of interest forms and stuff are deficient. Do we want to adopt language related to that?
Well, this is on ballot curing, right?
So this would be nomination curing. It's if someone submits a conflict of interest form and they didn't sign it. They submit a conflict of interest form and they checked the wrong box or something. There was some language discussed at a previous meeting there was language in, I think, the December 16 draft was the first time I had seen it, that said, we'll look at it over a 24-hour period and the committee will reach back out to them and give them the opportunity to fix it. But I don't think we have actually, I misspoke earlier. I don't think we've discussed that at a meeting before. So it's not a grace period of just the submission. It's the committee taking an active role in saying, you had these 2 problems with your conflict of interest form. Please correct them. You have 24 hours from when we give you the heads up. Which would actually apply even prior to the deadline. If the deadline's March 25th, if somebody sends us something on March 3rd and there's a problem, do we notify them that there's a problem, basically?
George, much of what I have here opposing the your version is the removal of certain sentences or clauses, and I'd like to have more action on that, but I don't think we have time tonight.
Yeah, Paul, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
I wanted to. Can we finish talking about this thing first, just so that I can get the box checked and cleared off, and then we can jump on to the next issue?
Okay.
Okay. So, do we want to provide an opportunity for people to cure their nomination materials? If there is an error with their conflict of interest form or candidate statement, I think would be the other thing. Do we want to say the committee is going to take a look and notify people if there was an error in that, and they have 24 hours, even if that extends beyond the submission deadline?
I think so. I think we should have that provision. Let's face it, this is a small neighborhood of people who we hope they'll work together and prosper together, and we want to work together, certainly. So.
All right. Leah, what are your thoughts?
I know, I feel like we're already giving them a grace period. I don't know. If Paul feels strongly about it, I'm fine. I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I'd lean in favor of, inclusivity. We have to take a look at these anyway. So I think we can pretty easily write in language saying the committee reviews them as they come in. We'll notify people if there is an issue and they have 24 hours to address the issue. Do we think that's enough time for them to address any issues that they might have? 24 hours from when the committee provides them with the notice that there is an issue?
Sure.
That's sufficient time, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that gets us done fast enough that we're not really stretching out notifying everyone of who has been nominated. So, okay, so I would propose we will write in to find it.
Leah, don't die on us.
Yeah, Liz.
I'm gonna have to go soon. I need some medicine.
So this would go into the nominations section. I would probably write it as a new paragraph, but we'll just propose language saying the committee will review submissions for completeness, if there are issues where a form is incomplete, or if a form is incomplete, the committee will notify the candidate, and the candidate will have 24 hours to address the outstanding issue. So I motion that we adopt that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So that's it for my list. So, Paul, if you give me 1 second to type really quick, and then I think I want to move on to the issues that you were talking about.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, thank you guys for being patient. Okay, Paul, so I'm going to turn it over to you for some of the issues that you said you wanted to talk through.
Well, as I said, I've received several very pointed considerations here. Some opposition to your version, and so forth. And I'd like to have some of this input. Whether we do it now, when you're going to open it up again now and see from the agenda, right? You're going to open it up to people.
Yeah, I think I had on the agenda. I put in opportunity for resident comments at the end of the end of the meeting.
Right. I guess what I'm asking of you and Leah is what input should we or could we have from these people's comments, which they've spent a lot of time reviewing what we have here and making their own assumptions and critiques of. What can we do that we feel that we've taken up their positions, or at least listened to their positions? Are we going to approve this as a unit, but open it up for us to have more input in it, or have them put an addendum on it? I don't know.
Well, this is a draft. We've just voted on the points that remained that still needed to be voted on. So now this draft will go to council. Community members will get to comment, in addition to council members, when they receive the draft. So we had to have a draft to present. So now we've done that, which is great. And now we can, there can continue to be discourse, but we have all of the issues have now been voted on.
But should not the council have and be able to see what comments we received on these or not? Or is that taking? In other words, we're saying we're making a determination, a decision on these comments that the people have given to me and probably to you and whatever.
Yes, to you and me, but not to George.
So, Paul, I'd say, if you've got some of them in front of you and you want to address some of them now, we can. I haven't seen them prior to I haven't seen any kind of public comments. I just have the ones that I can address coming out of the notes from earlier. So, ballot curing language was struck from the December 16th draft because that was my interpretation of the vote that we took during our December 13th meeting when we said we're not doing ballot curing. Ballot curing is different than our ability to say we are accepting certain ballots. So ballots where husband and wife submit them in different envelopes. We don't do signature checks, but things like that, that's not something that we need to cure. That's just something we choose to accept. Curing is us taking an active role in going and fixing something where the only thing that ballot curing really applies to is an unsigned ballot. And my interpretation and memory was at the December 13th, we said, we're not doing that. And so that's where I know that was one concern that was raised earlier. One had to do with us certifying the voter roll. That was the changes I made on that, as I noted in the track changes one, was based on our November 15th meeting, where we said we were going to go back to the previously existing language on that did not include anything about the committee certifying the voter roll or anything like that. We said we were going to go back to the 2019 language in the who can vote section to say that's what we're using there. But that was my interpretation of those rules, and I think those were the two that I had gotten from earlier in this meeting, but I haven't seen the list. But if you have other ones you wanted us to run through.
Let me read one. This is one of 9. The December 16 committee draft stated that questions for the forum, candidate forum, may be sent to the committee by any reasonable means the voter finds convenient. The new draft, lines 109 and 110, changes this without announcement to by the means specified by the committee. Too bad for those not used to using whatever means the committee specifies. I mean, that's just one of 9.
Yeah, so that one I can say specifically related to, it wasn't at November 15th, it was at one of the other ones in earlier November where we don't have minutes for those meetings yet. I've talked to Niles over the holiday. I promise I will go through and listen to the audio recordings of those meetings and build minutes for those first couple of meetings that we had that we don't have minutes for. That was a change reflecting, I remembered from my personal notes, not minutes, but that we had discussed with Niles, there are certain record-keeping requirements relating to questions that come in. And so that's where we might want to specify and say, these are the methods that we're going to accept questions for.
Yeah.
As opposed to if we say by any means the voter finds convenient, I think that opens a can of worms where it was beneficial. I can speak just last year, moderating the forum. We said just email, but I'm sure we can find some other ones as long as there's a record where I could very clearly point if someone had a question and I'd say, these were the 47 questions we got last year. These were all the questions. I was not shading anything. I wasn't ignoring questions from people. These were all the questions we got. And so it was entirely just for a clarification based on my memory of our earlier conversations that we might want to correct it to ensure that we are able to say these are the methods we want because that will allow us to do record keeping. If we want to go back to the other one, I'm perfectly fine with having that discussion and making that change tonight.
Oh,
Leah, what are your thoughts on that section?
I have no problem with it. I mean, I mean, to your point, like someone could write a note on a scrap piece of paper and we'd have a difficult time tracking that. So if we want to be good at our quote unquote job and be able to track communications, it's important that we set forth what means we'll accept, the kind that can be tracked, recorded in an accurate way.
In Congress on the Hill, they'll have a document which is what basically the majority has voted for, but then they have a minority report attached to it that the minority says, we don't think that what you did was right, and here's the reason we don't think you were right. I guess what I'm saying, does that make any sense in this instance to have these people's comments? Maybe we're not going to identify the people, but their comments on the sections of the document that we have agreed that we have put forth. Does it make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I'm just saying what the Congress does. But a minority report, and the Supreme Court too, of course.
Yeah, but it's definitely something where, there's absolutely nothing that would prevent them from sending all of these comments to the council as well. We can go through and address them one by one here. We can bundle them and, kind of include them as an additional package and say, look, these are comments that we received. And by we, I would say we might want to
committee.
Well, we might want to say, if people have comments, send them to the committee inbox between this period and this period, and we will bundle those comments and send them up to the council so they can consider those as well. Again, just for record keeping purposes, that way we have
let them have final say on whether, on this document. That just means a lot to the people who live in Martin's Additions. I mean, we're taking it very seriously, and these are people that have, and they've put a lot of time into this. I can tell you, these people that sent these, have really done a lot of research.
Well, maybe we should just send them to the council. And the council can consider them in their draft.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying is attach. Here's our document.
Yeah.
Here are some other constituents' comments.
Yeah, like an addendum. Sure.
I mean, and let the council then make the final decision. I would feel more comfortable that way.
Okay. That works for me. That's fine.
I'm fine with, bundling whatever those comments look like and sending them up as an addendum. I mean, I can just speak for me. Like, I'm comfortable with that because I'm confident in being able to go through the draft and point to all of the changes and say kind of where all of these changes originated from. And I think that, allows kind of people's comments to have been heard. It allows us to move forward with putting out a plan. I mean, I can say, despite some of what some of the comments are derived from, what some of the comments sounded like earlier this evening, this isn't a new plan that I've written from scratch. This is the two previous drafts, the draft that we voted on in November, and then me going through and checking it against the draft that was shown to the council that wasn't necessarily the draft that we voted on, because we didn't actually vote on a draft in our December meeting. That's what this is, just with some changes made to it. This is not a new thing built whole cloth. I think if we want to set out a period and say, okay, everything comments that come into the committee box between X and Y, or if we have existing ones, but I think we would want to make sure that other people would have the opportunity to register their comments and not just, anybody who got it in before we arbitrarily say the deadline is the start of our meeting tonight.
These comments would be completely free of any names or any reference to individuals, but they would have there's some good points here. There's quite a few here of when lines or clauses have been taken out of the December 16th version, and why they're bad, why they're not good for for the election process. I'd like to have the council look at that and say, well,
that's
maybe,
fine. Yeah, we can include them. That works. That's good.
And so what I think we can do is,
hey, you guys, I'm not feeling well. I'm sorry.
I'll wrap this up really quickly. So, Paul, I think we can say, committee inbox is available. We'll give people a period of time. Everything that comes in, we will put into one document, so that way there's no names attached to it. If people want to put their names on things, they can reach out to the council directly. The council members are more than available, but we will, I think, we can say the next council meeting's in a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that.
It's January 20th.
Okay, so do we say maybe a week, and after a week we'll aggregate everything into one document. We'll make sure that gets up to the council. They've got at least at that point they get a week to look at the things in advance of their meeting.
Yeah. Good. I think I feel better about that, and I think that's better serving the council, so that they have an idea of more than 3 people, So anyhow.
Okay, so I motion that we make the committee inbox available for the next week. We'll aggregate any responses that come in and include those in a document, in a kind of an addendum or a document up to the council and say these are the public comments that we got on the draft plan.
Yeah, no, I sleep better at night.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I think.
Can I just jump in for 1 second, because I do realize that we have to talk a little bit about timing things here. So, because I know we talked at one point, the council had talked about, I should say, doing a special meeting to adopt the plan, just given the timeline with the beginning of the of the nomination period being at February 18th, which would mean, I mean, it's not the end of the world if they introduce the plan at the 20th. I think it would. I don't think it would be 30 days. I'd have to check between the January and February meeting. So the only thing that I'm saying is not to limit resident comments on the plan, but if we give them, but if the council wants to move more quickly on this, and the council can speak to this, is do you want to give them a deadline to submit their comments that gives some flexibility for the council to pick a date? Now, that being said, the council, I'm pretty sure 30 days would be, they could hold a special meeting like on January 18th, and I think that gets them pretty dang close. At the 17th, it's Martin Luther King Day is the 17th, which is the only thing that I'm thinking about. So they could do a meeting a few days earlier, but I'm just saying in terms of a deadline to turn this document around, that's the only question, just to make sure that the legislative calendar is maintained. They could also do a special meeting to adopt it as well. We could figure out the timing. But I haven't looked and counted the days quite right at the moment, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Keep us on a timeline.
Yeah.
Yep. Keep us on a timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel better about that. I really do.
All right.
Okay.
So
I think the last thing we need to do is then, just in the interest of kind of clarity and based on the last council meeting, so the December 29 draft that I circulated, incorporating the changes that we voted on and discussed tonight, I will send that back around so that Paul, you and Leah have a chance to look at it, make sure that my changes have reflected what we voted on tonight and reflect your understanding of the decisions we made. But I'm going to motion that we adopt that, say that's the draft, that's what will go up to the council.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
All in favor? Aye.
And then, I accidentally hit mute when I meant to set unmute. Sorry about that, Leah. Can you? Technology sometimes.
Yeah, do you want to register your vote?
Yeah. I'm asking her to unmute. She might have stepped away for a second.
Yeah.
Poor thing, my gosh.
I know.
I can't stand to look at her. Whoa.
Why don't you could go ahead and say whatever you want to say. We can record her vote anyways. It passed.
Yeah.
We'll just record her vote as soon as she comes back.
So Paul, the next steps. One, the minutes from November and December that you have seen, if you and Leah have a chance to review those and tell me if those look accurate, okay, that we can approve administratively and then we can get those posted. And as I said, I talked to Niles about our previous meetings. We have the audio recordings. I will go through, listen to those meetings and I will develop some minutes that I will then circulate. Approving minutes, my understanding is we can do that administratively. If there's an issue, we'll talk about it at our next meeting and they won't be approved. But if you guys just say, yeah, those look good, then we can get them posted. Does that sound good?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay. Leah, same vote for you? Does that sound okay? Okay.
And then,
Leah, did you want to register your vote on adopting the 29th plan with the changes we discussed?
I
Okay, thank you. The other thing that I was going to say for next steps, I will start circulating a document for both of you to start looking at, will be the communications calendar. We're going to want to start building that out. That will say, these are all of the messages that we send out, whether they're messages from us, whether they're inclusion in Friday newsletters, special bulletins, things that get, for whatever versions we still do for mailing out, but just starting to put together the calendar of when we're going to talk, when we're kind of notifying the village of all the steps and what those will say. So you'll see that from me in the next couple of weeks, is just starting to say, you'll see the document coming together. This is our communications calendar, so that way we can start working on that and make sure we're not up against it and we're scrambling every Friday trying to get language over to Niles to include in the bulletins. Does Does that sound good? Okay. Those were the only next steps I had. Did you guys have any other issues that you wanted to cover?
No, you covered mine, and that was, the minority report kind of thing.
Okay. Leah, anything else? Okay. Yeah, I think we're in good shape. I know with Open Meetings Act, we have problems that we can't actually discuss issues and policies outside of the meetings, but I know there's some of the administrative stuff that we are able to press forward on making those changes via email in terms of implementing the rules. So I will continue vigilant on that front. I'll ask you guys to continue to be vigilant on your front of if anything ever feels like, oh, we're getting slightly close to something that would trigger the Open Meetings Act violations. Help me throw the red flag, and we'll make sure we punt it to our next meeting. But that's it for things I had for the meeting tonight.
Great. Okay.
Okay, having heard that, it's on the agenda for opening up for resident comments.
Anybody left?
Yeah.
You still have 15 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So first,
Very nice meeting. I hate to be the bearer of complaints, but that seems to be my role at the moment. So first, by changing the date on which curing takes place from the so you've eliminated the period during which curing was to take place on the grounds that there wouldn't be any need for any time since we're not doing the issue of signatures. But basically what you've done, I believe, is eliminate essentially all curing other than signatures, because there are lots of reasons why a ballot might be deemed non-conforming other than a signature. So even though you haven't said it, you've effectively eliminated all curing of ballots, except possibly for those that can take place right there in front of the contractor on the Zoom. Secondly, with respect to the voter roll, and you, George, you said that this little agreement was voted on in the November 15th meeting. And just by chance, I happen to have here a printout of the November 15th draft minutes. And just as I had recalled, there was no such vote during the November 15th minutes. The only time I remember this agreement taking place was in a chance meeting between George and myself on the street, in which we discussed this. And as everyone who's been involved in this probably knows, George has one view and I have a different view. I think that the voter roll is fundamentally a responsibility of the committee. And so we went back and forth. George said to me, listen, let's just solve the problem. We'll just use that language in the who can vote section, and we'll go back to the same language that was used, from time immemorial all the way back to 2015 with respect to using the most recent electronically available document. Well, I agreed to that because A, it was offered in the nature of a compromise, not a complete elimination of all responsibility for the voter roll on the committee. Secondly, there were several other places in the document, in the election plan, in which in which the voter roll is discussed and the committee's role in this. So first, it was not discussed in the November meeting, as George had suggested, and it has never been voted on by the committee. And secondly, it is not a fair representation of the substance of our conversation on the street. Not that the conversation on the street matters very much, but that's where this alleged, I believe, came from. And so I think it's a complete, I hate to say it, Leah, I know it's not nice, but I think it's not an accurate representation. And the third thing that I am really puzzled about is respect to this idea of voting on the draft in the December meeting. Now, George, as you know, we had fully voted on the draft in the November meeting. One of the things that we actually did vote, actually we had something like 8 or 9 votes during the November meeting. One of which was, right at the end, a vote on the overall plan. So that the overall plan was adopted by a 5-0 vote of the committee. So then, after the big debacle at the November meeting, we then, in second week of December, we had a committee meeting in which we attempted to resolve the concerns of the council members. And we did adopt 2 changes, 2 amendments. And those were voted on, those were adopted. And I think that what you're telling me is that in order for this to be valid, that because we had some amendments adopted, therefore we need to go back and have another vote on the entire document. Now that's a new rule. I have not heard that rule prior to this whole business, but I don't think it's really a rule. But I do want to point out that if it is a rule that we have to have a new vote on the entire document every time there's an amendment, well, you guys have adopted a whole slew of amendments today, and you haven't had a vote on the overall document, and therefore, I believe that, I guess under this rule, that all of those amendments that you just adopted are not valid because you failed to vote on the overall plan. Now you have your choice. Either, this is not really the rule that you don't really have to vote after every amendment on the overall plan, or you do and you didn't do it. So I'm concerned about all 3 of those. And I think, in all honesty, I don't mean to be mean, but each one of these, the not expressed but still effective elimination of the curing measure, the complete misstating of what happened with respect to the voting roll, and third, this whole business about voting or not voting on amendments and having to vote but not vote. I have to vote, but you don't have to vote. We have to vote on my amendments, but we don't have to vote over again on your amendments. I don't understand any of that, but all of it goes to a kind of, I hate to say it, and I'm sorry, Leah, to upset you, but it goes to a kind of bad faith, and that's how I see what's happening here. So that's the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I would point out, we did just vote on this plan. That was, I think, the last thing we did before we moved into other issues. And the voter roll is in the November minutes. We didn't have a formal vote on it, but it is reflected in the minutes where we say we're going to go back to the 2019. It is something that I proposed, and the minutes reflect and say there was no objection from the other committee members. If that's something where we need to open that back up and have a vote of the committee and say, do we want to go with that approach? I think that's something we can do, but that was something that was discussed. Okay, Lynn, I saw you next.
Yes, thank you. There's references to December 29th. Sometimes it's called meetings. The last I heard you refer to it was a draft. But there's been a lot of reference to it by you, George, but I can't remember any reference by anyone else to December 29th. I think it's important that this has now been incorporated into and voted by your committee, that the entirety of that draft be made immediately available to everybody in Martin's edition, so that we can have that to look at in addition to the line items that you considered tonight and voted on. Without that, we're pretty much in the dark. And I feel very much in the dark. And I'm sure there's a lot of other residents who also. So I would like for you to say yes, that will be available to all of us without any delay immediately.
So Lynn, so really quick, because the 29th was not a meeting. The 29th was just the date that I emailed the other committee members and said, here is an updated draft that we're going to discuss at our next meeting. When you were talking about the December 29th draft being made available to everyone, can I ask what draft you're talking about? Because the version that was shared with a resident that I think is marked as the January 4 draft, that's the December 29 draft. The only change is for the purposes of the other committee members, there are comments in the margins that say, this highlighted section relates to grace period. Here's what I see as the 3 options for the grace period, but no actual me trying to skew things one way or another. The other version that was shared on the 29th is a track changes version.
May I give you a quick answer?
Yeah.
All the proceedings, drafts, whatever versions and modifications were made, you finally have a final draft which you're moving forward with. That's the one we and I would like to see. All the stuff that led up to it is pretty much meaningless because we do have a final draft which you voted on tonight, and that should be made available publicly.
Yeah, so the version that is the result of coming out of the meeting tonight, yes, will be made public because among other things it will be sent to the council, and so it will be part of all the council packets.
And this will be the full text of it, not just bullets.
Yeah, this is the plan that is being sent to the council for their consideration.
All right, and we don't have to wait for the next council meeting to see that. We should have that available to review so that when the council meeting does take place, we can be informed having read it.
So that one I would defer to Niles and to the council of when and how they make materials available, but I would have no problem with that, but that's more up to them.
Niles, can you cheer in on this?
Well, I mean, I think yes, if once obviously there was amendments made, so George and them have to have a moment to look at it. But as soon as they look at it, as long as the council is okay with it, we can send it out to the community. The January 4th draft that George mentioned is on the website right now. It's on the committee page. Obviously, there are amendments made, so we can do that. So we can put it out as well. And so I don't think there's a problem with that, considering all of these changes have been made in a public meeting. So we can just follow from that document.
So there's a January 4th draft you're referring to, but there are variations and changes to that.
So that were voted on tonight, the stuff that was voted on in this meeting that just happened. That all I'm saying is that we just need a second for the committee to make sure that what is produced accurately reflects what was discussed in the meeting. That's the only thing. So they can send that via email and just say, yes, this concurs with what happened in the meeting, and then then we can send it out in the public. So.
All right. Well, what I'm driving at here is so that we don't have a repeat of tonight's meeting where at the 11th hour, people are having to address and deal with and try to understand things, and that people instead have some advance time to look at, review, study, and be more well informed, and not doing knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. So we'll try to get it out as quickly as possible. It just takes the making sure that they have time to do that. Okay.
All right. So this was Thursday, and tomorrow's Friday, and then we have the weekend. And so, could we expect to have it by the end of business Tuesday? 3 business days.
Again, I'm going to wind up deferring to the council on that. Like, it shouldn't take us long to make these edits, but ultimately it's up to the council to decide releasing the materials sent up to them.
But, yes, but I mean, in terms of doing it, we can see, it's just as long as everybody approves and all of that, I don't think there's a problem. But let me just let Andrew unmute just so that he and Katie can comment. I know they wanted to.
All right, thank you.
I mean, I was going to mention something else, but to Lynn's question, I have absolutely no problem with releasing publicly whatever George and the committee has just voted on as soon as it can be written up. I'm not sure if George is doing it in real time, but that's not a problem. Whether there's precedent or not, I'm comfortable given the concern in the community for that to be seen ASAP before the council takes. I mean, simultaneously to the council as residents seeing it as well in on the website, not just when council meets. So I'm comfortable with that. But I was going to talk about something else, but Marty's ahead of me in line. And,
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to address that council question.
Marty?
Okay, thank you. Andrew, I'd like to thank you particularly for that last comment you made about the willingness to make this revised document available to the community ASAP. I really appreciate that. This was a difficult situation to deal with, given that there were, as Peter said earlier, a number of other substantive changes in this draft document, whether you call it the December 29th draft or the January 4th draft, primarily involving the voter roll. The document as it stands does, in fact, contradict earlier committee votes, which basically reinstituted the longstanding village practice of having an independent check on the voter roll, with the committee having the ultimate responsibility for the accuracy. That was not done last year, and it was the first time it was not done. The committees in the past have always verified the voter roll with some care, working, of course, with the staff, but not leaving that entirely on the staff. And I think that the voter roll issue here is very much about the character of the election, because if you don't have an accurate voter roll, you don't have a valid election. That's sort of the bottom line on it. And the procedures for verifying the voter roll, for checking the voter roll that have historically been done by the committee are the only independent check on it. It's really not fair to ask the staff to take on that responsibility. It's already enough of a workload on the staff. The December 16th plan, reduced the workload on the staff and put that responsibility, the legal responsibility for a legal document called the voter roll. It's a legal electoral document. And it's very different from the directory. The directory is not complete. The voter roll has to be accurate and complete. And certainly staff and committees have worked together in the past to update both the directory and ensure the accuracy of the voter roll. But their ultimate responsibility, that line in the preamble that it says the election committee is responsible for maintaining the voter roll, has been there since time immemorial and was removed from this latest draft, the December 29th draft, or it's January 4th draft, whatever you want to call it. The draft that was approved tonight removes the key language that has been part of the VMA election procedures, like I said, since time immemorial, and affects the accuracy of the election. It affects the integrity of the election. The workload on the staff is a concern to me, because I think Niles has more than enough to do already. And adding the responsibility for an accurate voter roll on top of that is something that had not ever been done until last year. Niles, you did a yeoman's task doing it, but that should not be your job. That's the legal responsibility of the committee. There are a number of other changes. As Peter mentioned earlier, the committees had voted to have ballot curing or envelope curing on anything other than a missing signature. If a missing signature, you're not going to count the ballot. Okay, fine. But other affidavit problems can and do occur. Affidavit problems are very common. And the decision tonight by the committee to change the vote counting date from May 26th, which allowed time for checking affidavits where people simply made mistakes, to May 23rd, the same night as the vote counting, effectively does eliminate any ballot curing. That is not what the earlier committee voted to do. They agreed with Arthur to not cure envelopes that were missing a signature, but the committee specifically voted to cure other envelopes, and that has now been eliminated without really being discussed. And again, the issue on the questions for the forum. Traditionally, the village has always, going way back since 1985 when we incorporated, had provisions for confidentiality of questions to the forum. If all questions have to come in on an official committee email, as was done last year for the first time, then there's no confidentiality. You have eliminated the ability for residents to submit confidential questions, which of course has an effect on residents and voters' ability to ask questions that are the tough questions you want to ask of candidates. So there are a lot of issues here, and I will be submitting some comments. I was very pleased to run, the manage elections for from 2015 to 2020. And I am really concerned about those and other provisions here that were adopted, I would say, without an explicit committee discussion and vote. These are big changes from prior practices. These are big changes from the December 16th plan that were not, in fact, voted on tonight or even discussed explicitly tonight. So my concerns are quite serious here, and I appreciate your willingness to give me the opportunity to say so tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to have the council look at these concerns in a minority report or addendum. And I think that it is imperative that you also go forward with the understanding that under the Act, no two of you can even talk to each other about this stuff without having an open meeting. I would encourage you to hold open meetings and err on the side of caution. Don't call it administrative if it involves any kind of regulatory procedure at all, because regulatory procedures under the Open Meetings Act must be discussed in open meetings, which means no two of you can even talk about a regulatory provision without an open meeting. Does that make sense to you, George? Do you understand that?
Yes, Marty, I understand. I've done the open meetings training. I've dealt with a lot of open meetings requirements through my work. I'm fairly confident, and I'm confident in my ability. I'm confident in Leah and Paul's ability to ensure that we are complying with all of the provisions in the law related to ensuring that we have visibility around these meetings. And I appreciate your comments. I appreciate all of the notes on your previous practices that I was able to pull from the files when I was generating my comments for previous meetings related to the voter roll and the processes. So thank you, Marty. Andrew, I saw you were next, unless you want to defer to Gene to go first. And then
wanted Gene to go next.
Okay. Gene?
It's I asked you to unmute, so it should pop up. There we go.
I'm thrilled to be given this precedent. This is great. Hi, guys. Wow. Got a couple of thoughts. I hardly know where to begin, but I really appreciate the remarks that were just made. And I think one of the things that's really important is to make sure that the community hears you guys. The community hears the election committee. I think you could. So what am I doing here? I'm going to give you guys advice. Oh no. Make sure the community hears you in whatever fashion that is the best delivered. One of the suggestions I would make to you is, because you can't get decent comments if you're not sure people understand what you're saying. One of the things I thought about, because it's very complicated, I don't really understand a lot of what you guys are cooking up. For example, how do you add somebody to a voter roll at 8 o'clock on election day? How do you do that? They come, they show you and then you give them a ballot, and how are you sure that they haven't already filed the ballot? Anyway, it's complicated. So it's very complicated. So one of the thoughts I came to my mind was, consider doing a flow chart, the old-fashioned management flow chart. The old decision-making diamond, the yes, no, the arrows go this way, the arrows go that way. Does it work? For two reasons. One, to make sure that what you've come up with actually works from a practical standpoint, and that then people understand what you're saying. Because there's nothing worse than getting comments about something that are really the result of people not understanding what you're talking about, right? So look at the communication tools that are being used and the communication opportunities to show. I'm really not trying to lecture you, honestly, I'm not. But make sure people understand what it is that you're doing and what you want them to do. I think a flow chart would help. I'm happy. I'm the old flow chart queen. I'm happy to help with that. And the other thing is, it's very good for your own evaluation of whether or not you're being clear. So I, of course, have a million comments, and I'm going to spare you all because gosh knows it's been a long evening. But My concern is with voter rolls also, because our charter now, I tried to go and find out what the charter requirements still were. Years ago, were not that you did not have to be registered in Montgomery County, because we had, and the idea was at the time when it was developed many decades ago, was that we had so many people who were not citizens, that, and Martin's Editions prided itself with this, that we let non-citizens vote. But just because at the heart of it all are our voter rolls. Absolutely. And that's what makes a good election. Nothing else that we do. If we know the people who can vote are here, we're good. So I'm happy to help clean them up in any way we can. But I hope that you guys, I'm sure you guys appreciate how important it is. And I'm always full of opinions. So anytime anybody wants advice, they can always call me, okay? I'll put my hand down.
Yeah.
Now, if I can tell you want to respond.
So I just wanted to say no. I'm not going to disagree with anything. I just want to clarify something.
Smart man. Smart man.
So, just to clarify, under state law, anybody who is registered in Martin's Edition with the county,
right,
is legally a voter in Martin's Edition. What state law also provides is a supplemental list, which are people who don't apply and so on. So I just want to clarify that, because you were talking about registration with the county. Everybody who's registered for the county is registered here, but people who aren't.
I'm well aware of that.
Yeah, no.
It's then figuring out who you don't know about. Who you don't know about, who's not registered in Montgomery County, who either is qualified or under county regulations or under our regulations.
Right.
It's figuring out who's it. Takes a little bit of work.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you were saying. I just wanted to clarify those two things. That's all.
I know you knew it, but I'm happy to help. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gene. And I might well be taking you up on that and sending you a number of
Absolutely.
video
Call
charts.
me in a heartbeat, George. Okay.
Absolutely. Andrew, or do you want to let Susan go first and then you wrap it up? Okay, Susan.
Sorry, I asked you to unmute, Susan. Sorry, but then you hit it again. Sorry.
There we go. Okay, thanks. So, thank you. I think these were good points that people have brought up about the curing the ballots. I know that there was a very specific thing that was passed at the meeting about the ballot curing. Curing of unsigned ballots was not to be done, but the other type was. So I think maybe it was just an oversight that by eliminating the time at which everything had to be counted, that would effectively eliminate being able to cure the other ballot envelopes with issues such as smudged or water damaged signatures or family members using the wrong envelope. So basically, if you do eliminate the days, a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, whatever, to do that, then you've eliminated any kind of other ballot envelope curing. So knowing that, I guess, hopefully the council, if this is the plan that is going forth to the council can adjust that back. And maybe not even just 3 days, it could be 4 days, it could be, that's just, if I understood correctly from Niles at the meetings that I went to, I recall Niles telling us that the council can change and amend the plan after it's introduced, that it's not like the end of it. So
correct.
The council, can ultimately adjust some of these things, hopefully. And I just think it's important that we remember we're all on the same team. We're all part of this neighborhood. We're all neighbors. We're going to see each other after these council meetings online. I know we all feel very passionate about whatever election plan, we're devoted to, or whatever measures, but we're going to see each other in the end. And so when we've talked about cordiality and I noticed what I considered dismissiveness towards the former chair of the election committee committee at this meeting, in fact, earlier by one of the council members. And I want everyone to just be aware that I don't want this I don't want it to be normalized, even though it has in the past in council meetings, really before Council Chair Calders, there was kind of a normalizing of cutting off people. And, it left a bad sense among people afterwards. And I think we all need to continue to be vigilant not to do that. And if I'm going to call it, I'm still going to say things that appear to me to be a certain way. For example, that I had the impression after the last meeting that there was going to be another discussion of the plan to vote specifically on just 2 or 3 things. And frankly, I think a number of the council members genuinely had that interpretation, that they thought there was only 2 or 3 things that needed to be adjusted. Well, we came to a meeting, we found out otherwise. So now, at the very least, let's note that, okay? Let's be aware that when something is held up on a procedural issue, there can be another agenda there. There could be a desire to change a plan entirely that might not be announced. And that's the way it might turn out. And it's on you, okay? The council members who thought this was a great idea, that's fine. You thought it was very important. And now this has happened. So obviously the plan has changed more and you have more things to consider. But don't shoot the messenger, okay? Let's look at this with open eyes. This has happened. And don't be afraid, I would say to the new council, to the new committee, don't be afraid of input from residents. We get stronger products when more of us really do contribute to it and there are more eyes on it. And there's a lot of expertise in the community from former chairs. And there's been a lot of slandering of former managers and chairs of the election committee that are here today. And that have been with us. Rest in peace, Frank Carell. And I hope that George and the current committee will feel comfortable reaching out to Chair Khan, to former Chair Khan, to former Chair Langland, to Gene Sperling, to others, Ted Stoddard, about things that have happened in the past. Because I think we gain a lot of insight and expertise from what's come before. And I think sometimes, we might have just an idea that this is whatever we want is the best for our community, but we do learn from others. So, and finally, I hope that there will not be a kind of a double standard toward asking questions of this plan any more than there was toward the other. I do feel, and I want to say honestly, I would give the council members an A+ on goalpost moving when it came to the former election plan. Every time there were things brought up, it was almost like when Natalie Welly resigned, it was part of what she said was, it's never enough. It's never going to be enough. It seemed like we had to keep coming back again. The plan was coming back every time the chair would have a whole introduction written up to give to the council. It never got there. There was a lot of goalpost moving. And now we have suddenly so many things that were different this time. And a few questions were asked. And I felt like there was a dismissiveness both toward me and some others in this community who asked very legitimate questions that should be asked. And we need to be upfront and not be afraid of being transparent with others. So anyway, I hope that the double standards will be reduced. I hope that the exclusivity and the kind of whisper campaigns that happen towards people in our community, particularly election chairs, election committee chairs. So there was so much happiness with what my husband, what Peter had done on the walkability task force. Never a negative word, but you got to be the election committee chair. Oh boy, you're walking into the middle of target practice. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge and I think any of us who felt excluded on the council members themselves, by each other, who might not get the respect they want or feel like, they're being sidelined. It's an uncomfortable and hostile work environment to be in. It was absolutely a hostile work environment for the former chair of the committee. And I hope that'll change. And I hope that your colleagues on the committee and the council members will be aware that we need to be affording respect and appreciation to everyone for the work they do. And thank you for the time that I've taken. And thank you for all you're doing to the current committee. I know that it's a lot of work. There's a lot that's involved. And that's why I knew that at the last meeting, when they talked about 2 details that held it up, the whole plan, over 2 really small details, I knew that was like a very, very, very small part of what was doing. So I knew that it was being poorly, it was being misrepresented. What was done on it was being misrepresented as not having been voted on when it was, and it could have been very easily addressed by one edit and a very small vote. But instead, it turned into a big character assassination free for all, and that was uncomfortable. So hopefully, that will be avoided in the future, because I said, we all live together in the end. We're all neighbors, and we should love each other and care about each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And as the new chair of the committee, I wholeheartedly endorse there not being whisper campaigns of mean things about the chair of the committee, but that's just selfishness among other things, as well as a desire for improvement in the discourse relating to election issues in the village. Lynn and Jean, you both still have your hands up. I am guessing those are okay. Andrew.
Thanks, George. So I just wanted to say, first of all, I thank everyone here that this has been as civil as could be, given the strong emotions and the strong feelings on this particular matter. I think, as George just pointed out, this is kind of a two-way street. There seems to be tax flying in every direction, and maybe if you become the chair of a committee or a council, you get attacked. I think seeing that George wasn't looped in on any of the comments means that maybe people did think that he was partial or biased in this process, and I feel like George has been nothing but straightforward and trying to do his very best under the circumstances. There was some ambiguity, it seems, in terms of timing, end of day, 8 p.m. So some of that, I think, was fair to be addressed. But I, again, want to commend Susan for reflecting what I have said, and that is that I think the point of this meeting was to address those items that had not been voted on by the committee. And I think we can all agree that if this had happened under Marty's chairmanship, other folks would have said, well, are you disenfranchising the committee members that didn't see that final product because that final product didn't reflect all the items that had been voted on, or omitted something, or worded it differently? I made the big mistake, and maybe other council members did as well, saying, well, why don't we just give this back to the committee to make sure that they agreed with those additions that had not been voted on? There was no bad intent there. And that, of course, we know what that led to. I don't think that's moving goalposts. That is just, and again, there may never have been precedent, but I had no agenda. That was just my feeling that if I had been on a committee that had voted on various items, however small they are, if they were changed in the process from when it was voted on to the delivery to the council, I would have liked to know. That's all. And maybe that's splitting hairs, and maybe that's silly, but that was the only reason that I suggested maybe we can just check the box and get it over with. Okay? Now, I promise you, as the chair of this committee, and Susan, please call me Andrew, for the love of God, I don't want to be Chairman Cowders in when you address me during these meetings. I promise you that everything, every comment, and every item that is going to be received by this council will be reviewed, will be debated, and will be considered fairly, including the curing. I noticed that as well, the timing on this, in considering envelopes, etc. I'd like to have a little bit more time. So I will look at that, and I know my other colleagues will look at that as well. this is not a done deal. What comes to the council, including the comments that George and Niles will package for us, will be reviewed, and I think we'll have a vote on them, and it'll be fair and square with no agendas, or so I hope. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm really grateful for everyone staying on this call, this Zoom, especially Leah, who definitely sounds like she's a little under the weather, and hopefully that's all it is. And I appreciate all the strong feelings, because it means you care. You care about this community. You want it to be a fair election. I think past elections have been fair. I think nothing in this conversation today leads me to believe that anyone's trying to undermine this election or disenfranchise our voters. So I thank you. I wish you all a good night. And I thank George, Leah, and Paul for their patience and for putting up with all this crap, because that's what it is. And thanks, Peter, for joining. I know from my last conversation with him late last year that he was very, very upset. And I'm just glad that he's not disengaging, that he's staying at it. And same goes for Susan and Lynn. I know has been on, and hopefully Natalie's been listening in as well. And thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I think that concludes our evening for the resident comment period. I think we got to everybody. So do we have a motion to... Peter is waving.
Yep, I'm muting you, Peter. Okay.
I believe there's another person with her hand up.
Yeah. We can. Who?
Marty Langland.
Okay.
Marty. Oh, is that a new hand, Marty? Sorry.
Yes, it was a new hand. And Andrew, I want to thank you for your comments. Peter, I want to thank you for waiting. And I have a question about the committee going forward, whether the council intends to bring it back up to 5, given that a 3-person committee really is quite handicapped by the Open Meetings Act in terms of their procedure. Is there an intention to appoint additional people?
I think that's a question for the council rather than for the committee, because that's not something we can decide.
That's correct, but I was addressing it to Andrew.
Can the council members address that on a meeting that isn't their meeting?
Yes. It's a
I
question
want to
of
make sure we
intent.
don't run into any issues with their council members discussing policy on something that wasn't publicized as a council meeting.
Yeah.
No, this is an open question to the council about their plans going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Marty.
Hey, Marty, has not been discussed among us council members since we haven't been in an open meeting since the last one, but I'm happy for us to raise it at our next council meeting. So
Thanks very much. That was the answer I was hoping for. Thank you. And the other thing is about...
Yeah, Marty, sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off or tell you we're not answering it. I just wanted to make sure that I know there's some rules around that and wanted to make sure we didn't run afoul of any rules in terms of...
I appreciate being careful about the rules, you know.
And as you know, Marty, one of the things that we put for is to have these larger committees. We could have 3-person committees over the years. So I've pushed, Katie has, others on the committee, on the council have pushed for these committees to have 5, not just 3, at least 5.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. And I appreciate also that the committee has been balanced. I think that the opportunity for some additional public comments is important here, because there are some major changes in this latest plan that were not voted on. But I want to thank you again for your openness, because this is really an important issue. Fair elections matter. They matter to the village. They matter to me personally. I've been doing elections since I was 19. And I think that it really is a key character issue for us as a village to have very transparent elections and that are really seen as transparent. And so I echo Gene Sperling's comment about communication and the need to get this latest draft plan out to the citizens for comments sooner rather than later. In terms of timing, February is a short month. I think you actually have to, if you're going to have 30 days to introduce this and then adopt it before the February 18th beginning of the election cycle, I think you need to have a council meeting by the 16th
That's what I was. Sorry, Marty, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Niles, did that come out right?
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I am thinking as well. So in terms of scheduling, that's something that the council can do administratively. So let me just count days and send an email to the council about that in the morning, just so that we have it, and then we can announce what we want to do in terms of meeting wise. I believe you are right that it is the 16th. Now they can also we can work on that in various different ways. Okay.
That's great, and I assume that will be an open meeting with ample time for community comments and discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it has to be an open meeting, so it's just about scheduling it, and then we can announce it as soon as we can. Okay.
That's great. Thank you. That's the right answer too. That's what I was hoping for. And finally, Andrew, I would hope that in terms of the format of the council meeting, that you would go back to the process you've been using at the council meeting since July, and that the election committee previously used up till tonight, which is to allow public comments topic by topic, item by item, rather than simply limiting residents' comments to the beginning and the end. You get a more organized meeting when you allow people to discuss each topic. It works better. It's a good practice, and I've really been happy to see you do it at the council meetings. It's also fairer and more even-handed to allow people to raise questions or discussion points as you go through each topic. It makes for just a better community relationship and a more organized meeting, and I commend you for doing it at the council meetings. I would ask you to do it particularly about election regulations, because looking at regulations and asking people to not comment during the item-by-item discussion is difficult, and it works better. It's better for the community. It's better for the council to have an item-by-item discussion where people can, are invited to speak on each particular topic. So thank you for doing it at council meetings. Thank you for doing it, I hope, at the special council meeting on the election procedures. It really makes a difference.
Thank you, Marty. Susan, is that new up or is that still legacy up?
Okay. Yep. I'm asking you to. There we go.
Hi. Thank you for letting me talk, because by talking now, I don't have to hold this in for a long, long time. But I do feel the need to note one thing. We've talked about how it's important that we don't go around the chair. The chair of the committee should be seeing any kind of communications that were sent by others. I just want to note, kind of for the record, that one of the reasons we had such a difficult council meeting last time was, for the second time in a row, a kind of gotcha environment happened where the chair was not told about concerns that a number of people had talked about ahead of time, including current members of the committee and including council members knew about these. No member of the committee informed him of these very small things about that could have easily been addressed ahead of time. Adding one sentence about curing, adjusting the thing about the 30-minute, if you wanted to vote on it at first. Those both could have been adjusted if the other committee member who was concerned about that talked to the chair ahead of time. The choice was not to. The choice was to tell the chair of the council about it, but not the chair of the committee. The choice of the council chair at that point could have been to directly tell the chair of the committee about it. But that didn't happen. It was sprung on him at the meeting itself, okay? The third choice that could have been made there to improve that environment, to keep this from happening again, I'm just saying it's for the pursuit of having a better interaction, is the chair of the council could have told the committee member who was concerned about this to talk directly to the chair of the committee. 3 times choices were made that sidelined the chair of the committee, so that it was sprung on him. It was a surprise to him. Suddenly, once again, we're not going to hear the introduction of this because of two new topics that had not been told ahead of time. That kind of surprise gotcha moment is not only difficult and painful, but it wastes enormous amount of time and expertise and energy and emotion, and then ended up resulting in 2 people resigning, essentially, because it was so shocking and stunning and unbelievable. So while we talk about, I was just asking a question. If people can't deal with questions, these are just 2 understandable questions. those questions could have been told to the person in, to the chair ahead of time, okay? And not just sprung on. So there's a way of doing things that could be a little bit more respectful. And I think we all need to have an understanding of our role in contributing to that. It wasn't just someone who kind of emotionally went off the fly, like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. I'm so disturbed by it. I'm suddenly going to resign. These were choices that you all made in the way you did management, and that's okay. But let's just all, we all have a part in that. And to repair the damage and injury that has been done by it, I have to be able to acknowledge that. And so, I hope it'll get better moving forward. But I think we all have kind of played our role, and I know everyone's contributed. Maybe things I've said have been offensive to someone, and we could say things more politely, and I'll try to do that too and be more empathetic. So and again, we're all part of this community. We're all neighbors. We all should love each other, and hopefully we'll all keep getting along. And thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I think
Andrew, your hand is still up. Okay.
Just real briefly, I don't want to belabor this, but I think there are folks here that are always looking for gotcha moments. They're always looking to get undermined or somehow screwed by the process. I think if you're looking for it, you'll find it. And I would have to wholeheartedly disagree, Susan. I know that you have a lot of skin in the game here, both as a partner to Peter and as a caring resident. But there was no gotcha moment from my end. I received, and I don't have the timing here in front of me, I received that document, and it took a little bit to read through it before the council meeting. That's it. And I noticed these issues. So, again, if we're looking for these gotcha moments, if we're looking for a faction to attack the other faction, we'll find it. But I think it's gotten so old and tired in many ways that I think it's not fair. That's all I've got to say on that.
Thanks, Andrew. Hey,
sorry, I think Katie put her hand up there for a second.
Yeah, Katie. Sorry.
And I want to be as brief as Andrew, and I just want to support him on that. I don't like gotcha moments either. Honestly, feel like we should just forgive and move on at this point. But if we have to go back and we can't go back in our time machine and fix everything, honestly, I've treated it as a draft process. I was looking at it as the latest draft that I hadn't reviewed, and there were some questions. Did not mean to offend Peter or Natalie in a gotcha moment. That was never my intention either, and I just wanted to state that. And I'm sorry if feelings and were hurt and frustrations were aired, but I hope that we can just move forward, and it sounds like we are now. So just wanted to say thank you to Andrew, and thank you to everyone who's still on here.
So just as a point of reference, I think at some point Paul dropped off. I don't see him on here. So I just wanted to see
I
where
think
we are
lost Paul at some
quorum-wise.
point. We do theoretically still have Leah, so
Yeah, I'm
we
just
might
going to
have
see
a
if
quorum
she's
to
still...
adjourn.
Yeah. I mean, you can also just...
Hey, we still have Leah.
Okay.
Barely. Leah, are you still alive? Okay.
Alive.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I do.
I second that motion. All in favor?
All right.
Okay.
To say the time.
Leah, I will circulate minutes from this one. I'm going to warn you, my draft minutes are like 9 pages long, so it might take me a couple of days to get them consolidated down. As much as I'm sure you wanted in your sick bed to be poring over the minutes, it might take me a couple of days to get them to you guys.
So just for the record, the meeting adjourned at 10:12.
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Niles.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to end the meeting for all, and then so nobody has to do anything else. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Niles. Feel better, Leah.
Thank you. Bye.